members. Given the sentimental nature of this debate and the deep personal, cultural, and historical significance attached to it, I would like to greet and introduce myself to you by the Busman name given to me by my grandmother. Greetings in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I am Koike from the Vestelike Ointe House of the Komani San tribe. I'm the third born son of the third generation Jansons who was born in Ventersdorp and relocated to the historic Kliptown where I was born, steps away from where the Freedom Charter was signed. The apartheid government classified my father as colored, and I grew up a boy with a black face and a Western-sounding surname, speaking only Afrikaans and English. JBM Hertzog, the third Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa, erroneously defined us as owing our, open quote, origins to the European, and even speaks the language of the European as his mother tongue, close quote. As such, today, I wish to state for the record that as a colored, I speak English in this house today solely as a means of, solely as a means of general communication and not as my mother tongue. My mother tongue is the critically endangered Busman Nu language with only one remaining fluent speaker, Her Excellency Katrina Isu. I therefore greet you in my mother tongue, Oinke Uhuniki. I wish to greet you in the other primary language as the colored in which I'm fluent, Afrikaans, which is incorrectly perceived as the language of the Dutch, near Afrikaans as Meitaal, Onze taal. Sometimes it's used to relegate it to the status of less importance. It is referred to as Kombees Afrikaans at times, but nowadays we are calling it Afrikaans. I wish to greet you in Afrikaans, Awe Masakenis. Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with Mr. Mahlasela, who noted in his research that the notion of Black in general and Africans in particular, the notion denotes that all Blacks are Africans. Consequently, this raises a question about the construction of Blacks and African identity. I wish to repeat the quote, the notion denotes that not all Blacks are Africans. Consequently, this raises a question about the construction of Blacks and African identity, close quote. When the apartheid government took power, it passed, amongst other legislation, the Population Registration Act of 1950. This act required that people be strictly classified by racial group. Thus, South Africans were divided into four basic groups: Europeans, Asiatics, persons of mixed race, or coloreds, and natives, or pure-blooded individuals of the Bantu race or Black African race, so as to denote being really African. Moreover, Black, according to Steve Biko, was not limited to Africans, but also included Asians and coloreds. Biko pioneered the philosophy of Black consciousness, which centered race as a determining factor in the oppression of Black people in South Africa. In response to racial oppression and the dehumanization of Black people under apartheid, thus, Biko and the Black consciousness movement invented the identity of Black to denote all the oppressed racial groups: Africans, Bantu, coloreds, and Asians and Indians. However, the Africanists led by Robert Sebukwe broke away from the ANC, formed the Pan-Africanist Congress in 1959 based on the fact that, according to them, the term Africans refers to Blacks, excluding coloreds and Indians, as proposed by the Black consciousness movement. Post-1994, in an attempt to bring about equality, the ANC subscribed to the notion of Blacks in general and Africans in particular, hoping that this approach will address the imbalances of the past. The ANC firmly states in the documents on strategy and tactics from the Morogoro and Kabwe consultative conferences that the main content of the National Democratic Revolution is the liberation of Black people in general and Africans in particular. In both instances, during apartheid and post-apartheid, KHOI SAN, who is the First Nation, and true owners of the southern part of Africa, and coloureds have been stripped of being African. The late DSG of the ANC delivering the Albert Tina Sisulu Memorial, trying to stress that her dissatisfaction with the fact that coloureds are marginalized through the notion that coloureds lived a better life in apartheid. She then asked those who say that that coloureds have lived better in apartheid. She asked at the memorial lecture, have they been to Reveille Extension? Have they been to Nuclear? I would much doubt that, she says. I will further add, have they been to Eldos? Have they been to Ennerdale? Have they been to Menenberg? Have they been to Mitchell's Plain, the Cape Flats, to truly understand how colored struggled during apartheid? And now come to the Western Cape and see how even today fishermen can't fish. How at St. Helena Bay, a major road is built running through people's yards without public consultation. How colored people are still forcibly removed from our land. How in one government department, only 12 out of 454 staff is colored. How in Richards Bay Minerals, as an example, only 13.
Unfortunately, your time has expired. Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Molotsane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nation building and social cohesion in South Africa are deeply rooted in the vision of creating a non-racial society. This clarion call originated and was adopted in the 1955 Freedom Charter by the Congress of the People. Its declaration that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, and its call for equal rights and land distribution and the end of racial discrimination remain relevant. Inspired by the Clip-Down Freedom Charter, the 55th National Conference of the ANC reaffirmed the ANC's strategic objective of transforming South Africa into a united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic and prosperous society. This objective stems from the character of the National Democratic Revolution and the three fundamental contradictions of race, class, and gender. Furthermore, the Constitution of South Africa, adopted in 1996, enshrined the principle of human dignity, equality, and freedom. Section 9 of the Constitution specifically prohibits unfair discrimination on various grounds, including race, gender, and sexual orientation. The ANC National Democratic Revolution as a theory of the revolution is in direct opposition of the segregationist classification of the past and aims to restore dignity among citizens, especially the KHOI and the SAN community, whose cultures and customs are on the verge of extinct. These communities paid a heavy price for colonial past. Colonialism and apartheid had a significant impact on the race classification in South Africa, particularly establishment of segregationist policies and legislation. The KHOI and the SAN people suffer greatly as a result of apartheid colored designation. The Dutch East Indian Company and later the British colonial administration constructed a racial hierarchy that marginalized indigenous population such as the KHOI and the SAN. This early segregation system relied on arbitrary factors such as skin color, descent, and social status. The term colored, originally coined by the British, was used during apartheid to label citizens who did not fit the binary race model. The KHOI SAN and South Africans were characterized as colored and are part of the oppressed people of South Africa. The distinction of African in particular recognized the oppression of various native ethnic groups who, like the KHOI SAN, were discriminated against. It is important to note that colonial and apartheid government oppressed Black in a differentiated way. The Indian community, the colored community, and the African community were not allowed to live in the same human settlement. Access to land, economic opportunities, and education were restricted to different degrees. It is for this reason that even post-1994, the Indian community and colored community can have more land than majority African ethnic people. It is for this reason that post-1994, the use of these racial categories remain relevant to address the injustice amongst the people of South Africa. Without their use, we will continue to reproduce the injustices of the past. In 1994, when South Africa became a democratic country, the first step taken by the government of African National Congress was to commence the creation of a nation by introducing and implementing various transformative policies for the purpose of redressing the past apartheid injustices, which entrenched and executed racial segregation in all aspects of human endeavors. These interventions are implemented to redress the injustices of the past, at the same time foster socio-economic inclusivity, and build and create a new country where everybody is equal before the law. It was former President Thabo Mbeki who insisted that the main objective of the transformation is to establish a society characterized by equality and racial balances. Since the dawn of democracy, we can argue that the country has made some commendable strides to achieve the democratic project. We are all Africans as people of this nation, despite our different historical descent. It is the new vision of the creation of a new African nation in the southern tip of the continent that makes us one people in our diversity. It is this unity that will build our nation. The present South African regime socio-political developments have allowed an opportunity for the deconstruction of apartheid social categories such as colored. Many traditional colored people are now oppressing their rights to self-identification by identifying as San or KHOI. African Indigenous San and KHOI people are not fully recognized under national legislation. However, this has changed due to the Traditional and KHOI SAN Leadership Act, which was passed in 2021. The Traditional and KHOI SAN Leadership Act, signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa, recognized the KHOI SAN community, its leaders and structures. The Act aims to align traditional and KHOI SAN institutions with constitutional imperative, including the Bill of Rights, and restore their dignity and legitimacy. During the signing of the law, President Ramaphosa alluded that, I quote, while certain traditional structures and leadership positions have been recognized by law in compliance with constitutional prescripts, there has never been statutory recognition of the KHOI SAN. To end the formal recognition of the KHOI SAN community leaders and structures is a moment of restoration of the injustices of the past. The ANC's strategic intent was liberation of the Blacks in general and African in particular. This was essential for dismantling the colonial and apartheid system. It further emphasizes the maximum mobility of the African people as a dispossessed and racially oppressed people. African in particular extended to the KHOI and the San people. In conclusion, the KHOI SAN people should have been long recognized because of their unique rich history. The KHOI SAN are one of the world's oldest cultures, having a history spanning thousands of years. Their contribution to human history, including languages, tradition, and understanding of the natural world, are priceless. Recognizing their individual identity contributes to the preservation of our cultural heritage while also acknowledging and respecting their history and contribution. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And we now go to the Honourable Douglas.
Kaites, I greet you all in the name of my Father, Yahweh, and Jesus Christ, and His Son, and the Holy Spirit. I am a Koraner, great-grandson of Klaas Pofadder, after the town Pofadder in the Northern Cape was named. Today I rise not only as a representative of Mkonte Suze, but as a voice for the KHOI SAN people, the Aboriginal First Nations of Southern Africa. For too long, we have been rendered invisible in our own country, stripped of our dignity, our land, and our heritage. But today, we stand united under MK and demand justice, equality, and recognition under international law of all KHOI SAN Aboriginal and African Indigenous tribes, which this Parliament has shamefully failed to do. South Africa, the cradle of humankind, is home to the oldest living race in the world, the KHOI and the San. The KHOI and the San people, by DNA evidence, are the oldest living human population on Earth. We are older than the Aboriginal peoples of Australia and America's Native Americans. In fact, we are the most ancient First Nation people, predating any other race in the DNA record. Yet, despite this profound heritage, we remain unrecognized 30 years after democracy, considered outsiders because we are not considered as Africans in particular. In law, we are invisible in the land of our ancestors, the most oppressed Indigenous Aboriginal First Nation people in the world, and no one cares about us. A 2012 genomic study led by Matthias Jacobsen from Uppsala University, published in Science, confirmed that the KHOI SAN are the most ancient lineage of humans on Earth. Sarah Tishkov's DNA research from the University of Pennsylvania further highlights the San people as one of the most genetically diverse groups on the planet, carrying the oldest genetic markers. Yet despite this, our people are not recognized with Aboriginal rights in South Africa, and we have no protection, no land rights, no mineral rights, and no economic power in our own land. We are treated as squatters on the very land that our ancestors have inhabited for tens of thousands of years, as proven by science, history, archaeology, discoveries like our people's ancient Adam's calendars, the oldest in the world, and ancient cave paintings, and with our own DNA evidence. Our story is not one of mere neglect by the South African government and perpetuated by the current GNU. It is one of systemic oppression and exclusion reinforced by both colonial apartheid and post-apartheid regimes, using the term African in particular to create distinction between us and other African indigenous tribes post-1994 as a tool of furthering divisions amongst our people and perpetuate the KHOI SAN extinction narrative of the DA and ANC alliances over the past 30 years. The DA provincial government and ANC national government has continued our land dispossession and evicts our people from our homes every day, even now all over the Cape Flats. And yet this land is ours. We want our land back, and we have been finding our people taking the land from us since 1652, when Jan van Riebeeck came here. Even my own family's land claim on the West Coast has been gazetted in my mother's family name. But then 2 years later, they declared it a nature reserve with no consultation and without giving us our land claim and our title deed as is titled by law. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, ratified by South Africa in 2007, guarantees our people's rights as KHOI SAN Aboriginal African Indigenous peoples to land, resources, and self-determination. Article 26 of UNDRIP states clearly, Indigenous peoples have the right to the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned, occupied, or otherwise used. And yet, what has been done for the KHOI SAN and other African Indigenous tribes, for our kings, for our chiefs? Nothing but tokenism and empty words, landlessness and poverty for our people for 30 years. This is inexcusable and this is a disgrace. Our Aboriginal fishermen are made into poachers because of these unfair laws. In 1994, when South Africa transitioned to democracy, we, the KHOI SAN, the most ancient living people, we were denied recognition as a distinct Indigenous people, which has denied us our basic human and Indigenous rights and humanitarian aid for 30 years. This exclusion was deliberate and calculated, rooted in the colonial agenda to erase the KHOI SAN from history. This exclusion was entrenched in 1996 when the Constitution was used to exclude the KHOI SAN in Section 25 to the inclusion of the 1913 clause, which meant claims before 1913 would not be protected under law, which in itself is discriminatory and anti-Indigenous. This government speaks of land reform, but what does that mean for the KHOI SAN African Indigenous peoples? Nothing. Section 25 of the Constitution is designed to protect the status quo. It limits redistribution and ensures that the people who stole it held onto it. There's enough mineral and economic wealth to take all our people out of poverty, all 70 million for generations, including even our colonists and oppressors and landowners, where we can be the next Dubai and live together and jointly beneficiate the resources to lift all our people from poverty and ensure generational wealth for all races, tribes, and tongues living and born in South Africa. But we must grow up and face the truth and talk about the land like adults and find solutions jointly that is win-win, that gets us busy beneficiating our minerals and use the proceeds to get busy building new cities for the future. But we must first say today that the 1913 clause in Section 25 in the Constitution must be torn down. There are shackles. In 1950, under the brutal apartheid regime, the KHOI SAN were declassified as colored. This was not just a name change. It was a direct attack on our identity, our heritage, and our connection to the land, to erase our land ownership and land rights. But before 1950, we were known by our true tribal names, the Korana, the Khoi, the Kam, the San, the Griqua. But the colonial and apartheid government sought to make us disappear by reducing us to a single label of colored, which we embrace, and we have not forgotten who we truly are. This is our land. And this is our land of the great African indigenous kings and rulers. And we will share it with all South Africans if we stand united under President Jacob Zuma and MK. And we will claim our land back and rescue our people from poverty using the natural resources God has blessed us with. Amase. While the world watched in horror in 1950, Aboriginal and Indigenous people were taken off our lands with no compensation overnight and forcefully relocated to cheap labor concentration camps we now call townships, built in inhospitable places. The fact that we are still not recognized in the TKLA Act is not aligned with the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and doesn't recognize us as a nation and a First Nation is wrong. And the Commission on KHOI SAN Matters does not work until it aligns itself with UNDRIP. We, the President Jacob Zuma and MK, says the exclusion of the KHOI SAN people in government and society must stop with immediate effect, and the term African in particular must never be used again to exclude us as the KHOI SAN people ever again. Black must be meant and used to include all of us. It must be inclusive and not exclusive. We were hunted as vermin in this country. There was the Vermin Act until 1937, where the people, the Afrikaans and British descendants, could get a license and a permit to hunt us over there in Pretoria. They hunted us in South Africa, and they took our bodies and took our heads to the magistrate to claim our land. This is how they rid the land of us, and they committed genocide against us. Those farms, those beautiful farms in Constantia and all those places, those belong to us. They took us from it by blood. They took it from us by death. They destroyed our people, and that beautiful wines they're drinking is drenched in the blood of our people. And yet, 30 years later, this country is supposed to be a democracy, can't bring itself to recognize us because they fear taking the land and using the land for the delivery of our people from poverty. As MK, we will no longer stand for this. As MK, we support the current people, we support the KHOI SAN people, and Jacob Zuma and the MK and the KHOI SAN people that stand together to say, no, enough is enough. The land must be used for the freedom and the emancipation of our people, both now and evermore. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Maglua.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, the KHOI SAN have a vital role to play in this country. I am a descendant from the KHOI, the SAN, the Damara, the Namakwa, the Atakwa, the Griqua, and the Kurana. I am privileged today to address this House as one of the First Nation people. Being KHOI is original. Therefore, the KHOI cannot be regarded as primitive or barbarians anymore. Honorable Souls, in response to your subject of discussion calling on the government to officially recognize KHOI, SAN, and colored people as Africans in particular, and not just blacks in general, this motion is a clear indication that the national question on ethnic and racial classification has not been dealt with fully. If we are to create a brighter future for all, we must learn from our dark past. Being a descendant of the KHOI and part of an ancient world representing my family, I have given up in my fight to assist a claim of a portion of land on behalf of the Magluas, the Maglua clan in Hackensteek near Berkeley West in the Northern Cape. To date, I am still struggling and not sure of my surname, whether it is MC Glua, whether it is Gulwa, Meglua, or Maglua. The archives are silent on my surname too. As a result, to date, my family still experience dispossession of land. The real miracle of South Africa is that despite the brutality of our past, we must remain united in our diversity, where each of us are judged on the substance of our character and not on the color of our skin. By standing and stating my African identity as a KHOI and SAN, honorable members, read between the lines, because I want to understand I want you to understand my connection to the land. I want you to get a glimpse of me as the oldest inhabitants of this country. Our past, their place, their role in building this country as the KHOI from Botswana, Namibia, Asia, Southwest Africa, the Gamtoos Valley, in the Kalahari, Griquas from the Orange River, indeed, a clan that is the oldest of all DNAs. Honorable Deputy Speaker, why should we still, when filling any government form, be asked, are you black, Indian, colored, or white? The DA reject racism. The only way that we can continue to move forward is for us, each and everyone, to remain committed to the principle of non-racialism. Further, the KHOI and the SAN have been reduced and ended up as servants working as slaves and laborers for the Dutch. And even when Honorable Mynheer of the MK publicly in 2011 claimed that the Western Cape has an oversupply of coloureds, we as the so-called coloureds, the KHOI and the SAN, we remain not only silent, but we were resolute and we are not bitter at all. In the same year, a R2 coin was launched for the first time in the heart of the Kalahari, featuring the KHOI and SAN heritage and language, pleading for a diverse people to unite. The Constitution guides us on how to deal with social issues. There is no place for any political party to nullify the South African Constitution. It will pose a danger not only to the KHOI and the SAN people, but the rest of South Africans. And that is why, Chairperson, the DA has fought so hard for policies that advance the whole of society to ensure social cohesion and address pervasive inequalities. Voorzitter, ek is van die Noordwes. Ek is 'n Griqua. Ek is van die DA. Ek sien 'n reënboog. Ek sien die reën kom. Daar is hoop vir ons land. Ek is van Suid-Afrika. Ek is Afrika. Die real dance vir alle Suid-Afrikaners. Dit is hoogtyd dat daar die real dance moet begin. Ek dank u.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And we now go over to the Honourable Paulson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, we're going to give an accurate context as to why we use the phrase blacks in general and Africans in particular. And this historical account is void of emotion and confined strictly to a rational discourse. Before we do, I want to share the preamble of the founding manifesto of the Economic Freedom Fighters, where we state that the EFF locates our common struggle for economic emancipation within the long resistance of South Africans to resist colonial and imperialist political, economic, and social domination, starting with the glorious resistance of the KHOI and SAN people rising against colonial domination. Paragraph 133 of the EFF's founding manifesto states that affirmative action legislation that applies to the African majority should apply equally to the colored population. There is an inextricable link and symbiotic relationship between racism and capitalism. Capitalism is dependent on racism and sexism as sources of profiteering and, even more importantly, as a means to divide and rule. In an anti-black and pro-capitalist society, racism has been used to drive a wedge between workers who otherwise have everything in common and every reason to be allies and organized together. To this end, the concept of the colored race was created by the colonial oppressors to deliberately divide the black working class. As an anti-racist, revolutionary, Marxist, Leninist, and Fanonian movement, the EFF promotes non-racial and multi-ethnic working class unity to counter and abolish the destructive nature of capitalism, to make way for socialism. Those who are caught up in identity politics will always use race as a draw card, descending into the shallow world of racism. The formalization of socioeconomic injustice towards Africans started with the Natives Land Act of 1913, whose legacy still continues to haunt Africans today. The land dispossession of Africans was formalized and legislated under this notorious act. Many South Africans, especially Black South Africans, are still trapped in a cycle of poverty that emerged as a result of our painful history of colonialism and apartheid. A day after the Natives Land Act of 1913 was enacted in South Africa, Solomon applied 1913. Africans found themselves not actually slaves, but pariahs in the land of their birth. 69 years later, in 1982, novelist Bessie Head observed that, in fact, Africans had become a floating, landless proletariat whose labor could be used and manipulated at will. Without land, African people were denied an opportunity to sustain themselves through subsistence farming or to trade their excess produce. But even more tragically, Africans were effectively rendered homeless in the land of their forebears. The creation of the homeland system further relegated Africans to 10 economically unviable areas along ethnic lines. Africans in homelands were mostly forced to work in white South Africa, where they lacked legal rights as workers. This position created a large pool of cheap labor for white-owned farms and industries. Without access to land for subsistence or commercial farming or to build industries, Black South Africans had little choice but to work for low wages in the capitalist economy. The employment contract transplanted from colonial law became a tool for exerting control over these workers. It reinforced the subordination of Africans. Legislations that had an immediate impact on the colored population, Deputy Speaker, included the Group Areas Act of 1950, the Population Registration Act of 1950, and the Separate Representation of Voters Act of 1951. Up until then, colored people enjoyed limited voting rights and privileged social status. Naturally, they deeply deplored the introduction of these draconian legislations, enforcing social, residential, and political segregation. The legacy of land dispossession and labor control continues to shape South Africa's social, economic, and political landscape. The land question is a critical consideration in any effort to build a more just and equitable society. Colored people suffered under apartheid, but the suffering of colored people paled in comparison to the suffering of African people. Any just economic development initiative should therefore target the historically disadvantaged Black people in general and Africans in particular. These initiatives should include infrastructure development, skill programs, and support for small businesses to create economic opportunities. Black people in general and Africans in particular is an all-encompassing phrase that includes colored people and even Indian people as a means to address the historical injustices and create a more equitable and socially cohesive South African society. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And our next speaker is the Honourable Lutuli.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Chair, thank you. The late IFP founder, the Honorable Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, once said, and I quote, "We have our own history, our own language, our own culture, but our destiny is also tied up with the destinies of another people. History has made us all in South Africa." Honorable Chair, the legacies of the past remain pervasive, constantly seeking to cause division, which remains the IFP's stance on non-racist, all the more important. While we understand the need to foster a deeper sense of belonging, especially amongst those in a country who have often left overlooked, it is important that one pursue communal aspects that encourage unity, not aspects that will cause division. As the late IFP leader used to say, unity is not about uniformity. It is about the embracing diversity and find a strength in our differences. One strength our country has that is rich in its diversity. It is our traditional leadership structures. The topic at hand, Honorable Chair, indirectly touches on an issue that has been left unadequately addressed for far more longer and affects many South Africans across diverse ethnic groups. The issue of recognition, especially recognition pertaining to our country's traditional leaders. In our manifesto, we have championed the need of our country has for the traditional leaders to be given their rightful seat at the table. We have unapologetically stated that for our country's moral fiber to be restored, we need to support the work of the traditional leaders. Their needs to be help given to them to promote communal economy through self-help and self-reliance, programs and projects. As such, there is an urgent need for the amendment of Chapter 7 and 12 of the Constitution to spell out the role, power, and functions of the traditional leaders. As the IFP, we comment the current government as they are trying to revelate traditional leaders and its institution, as we have seen that in his first 100 days, the Minister of Cooperative Governments and the Traditional Affairs and the IFP leader, Honorable Hlabisa, has engaged traditional leaders and it's actively working on ways to integrate traditional leaders.
Honorable Latuli, your time has expired, unfortunately. Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Kojane.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. I'm going to keep my video off for the bandwidth. My network is a bit slow. The characterization of the Coloured and KHOI SAN people in South Africa, specifically the classification as non-African within government policies, raises concerns about the exclusion from redress policies like BBEE, as well as the Employment Equity Act. Now, this exclusion perpetuates the marginalization of these people from the very policies that are intended to address this inequality. Now, while apartheid has impacted Black Africans more severely, the unique struggles of Coloured and KHOI SAN communities cannot be ignored. They were also displaced, land was denied to them, and excluded from the economic participation, and these injustices, as we've heard today, remain unsolved. In provinces like the Northern Cape, where I'm from, and the Western Cape, where we are, coloured communities are in the majority, but youth unemployment remains high. Many of the coloured people and the KHOI SAN people feel alienated because they believe they are the forgotten people in this transformation agenda. despite a constitutional recognition of Khoisan people's heritage, they still struggle to reclaim ancestral land, and they receive minimal support from government and recognition from government. As South Africa's first inhabitants, categorizing them as non-African erases their history and identity and actually treats them as secondary beneficiaries under these policies that are aimed at undoing colonial legacies. Now, Coloured and Khoisan communities need targeted opportunities to correct this deeply rooted imbalances. If our focus as a government is on redress, then I would ask, in areas where there are significant number of Coloured and Khoisan populations, where are these community-specific programs? Educational support and bursaries, recreational and youth development programs are often based on local demographics, but we don't see it. These programs often bypass our communities, and this contributes to high levels of drug abuse, gangsterism, and unemployment, especially among coloured people. We see such examples in the Western Cape, in Mitchell's Plain, in Delft, in Gauteng, in Eldorado Park, in Westbury, in the Eastern Cape, in Rietbron and Klipplat, in the Northern Cape, in Rodepan and Greenpoint. Students from these communities also struggle to access higher education because, again, they are given a secondary priority in these financial aid schemes. They are exclusively earmarked as Africans in particular. And this leaves our young people feeling abandoned by this very government that promises equality and transformation. Now, BBBE is not exclusionary, but it prioritizes those at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, aiming to undo these centuries of systemic racism. But the key lies in us building solidarity rather than competition among our groups who are marginalized, as we've heard today. The argument that transformation must only prioritize Black Africans in particular overlooks the intersectional nature of South Africa's inequality. Coloured and Khoisan people remain at the periphery of economic progress, even decades into democracy. To exclude them from policies of BBBE and the Equity Act deepens this disenfranchisement, and it contributes to a generational poverty and social instability. It is not a matter of competition, but it is a matter of inclusion. And our communities, especially the Khoisan communities, have as much right to economic redress as any other group. There's been a severe neglect to correctly include Coloured and Khoisan in these policies, such as the BBBE and the Equity Act. In conclusion, I would like to state what the Minister of Employment and Labour has stated. Section 9 of the Constitution, together with the Employment Equity Act, states there shall be no unfair discrimination on the basis of race, especially against any employee, including applicants. There are proposed amendments to the Employment Equity Act and regulations, as according to Minister Meth, and she says that this will be completed as soon as the department has consultations. And we ask that this is done sooner rather than later. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And we now call on the Honourable Boshoff.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker. This whole issue that we are debating on today flows out of the ANC's successful attempt until very recently to maintain an hegemony on being the only legitimate freedom movement in South Africa. Now, this has been built on its so-called broad church, which includes, on the one hand, the Congress movement, with the Congress of the People held it down, which is non-racial and which includes as many people, and then Africanist or Pan-Africanist sentiments, which are actually very prevalent within the rank and file and even the leadership of the ANC. Now, during the struggle, it tried to define as many as possible people in by saying, okay, we are not an African or Africanist movement, but we are for Blacks in general, but Africans in particular. In that sense, embracing both the non-racial and the Africanist sentiments and not alienating anyone. Now, even when we got to the talks and the transition to the new dispensation, it was promised to the previous holders of power that the new South Africa will be devoid of race. Nobody will notice it anymore. It won't exist. But after taking over power, it had to deal with the spoils of victory. To whom did the spoils of victory have to go? To the small black elite, and therefore as many as possible people had to define out and not in anymore. So back is race, as one could have predicted, and now we are focusing on Africans in particular and not so much anymore on blacks in general. Nou my eie geskiedkundige kennis van KHOI SAN en sogenaamde kleurling identiteit het ek veral uit die boek van Dr. Patrick Tariq Millet of Millet met sy baie omvattende boek The Lie of 1652, waarin hy dan beskryf hoe KHOI SAN, soos wat hulle met blanke nedersetters aan die Kaap gekonfronteer is, eintlik een groep het meer saamgewerk, het meer geneig om saam te werk, sogenaamde collaborators, hulle het nader aan die Weskaap gebly, terwyl die non-conformist groep of na die Ooskaap uitgewyk het, waar baie van hulle met die Khoza saamgesmeld het, of na die Noord-Kaap beweeg het, waar daar 'n heel ander politieke dinamika tot vandag toe is, as in die Weskaap. Dan dui hy ook oortuigend aan hoe die grootste meerderheid van slawe, wat ook deel van die bruin of die kleurling identiteit uitgemaak het in later jare, uit ander Afrika lande gekom het, en slegs 'n minderheid uit die ooste, met die moslim godsdienst wat 'n versamelpunt vir weerstand teen die heersersklas geword het, en daarmee die illusie geskep het, dat baie meer mense vanuit die ooste na Suid-Afrika toegekom het om deel uit te maak van hierdie identiteit. Nou as ons vandag daarna kyk, moet ons in enige tegniese sin van die woord, is bruin mense of kleurlinge of KHOI SAN inderdaad Africans in particular, en nie net blacks in general, wat almal wat eens op 'n tyd hulle self as onder druk geag het, insluit nie. Die vraag is natuurlik, is hierdie kategorieë werklik nou nog relevant? En dit is eintlik waaroor 'n mens behoort te praat. Baie dankie.
Baie dankie, Barbara Litz. Our next speaker is the Honourable James.
Honourable Speaker, the identity of coloured and Indigenous people in South Africa is a complex and deeply intertwined aspect of our nation's history. One that cannot be adequately captured in a 4-minute speech. It would be a fallacy to claim that we can fully address this debate in such a short time. Coloured identity, along with that of Indigenous communities, cannot be reduced to a one-size-fits-all approach. It is multifaceted, with roots in a history marked by struggle, resilience, and resistance. Our story, my story, is one of displacement and survival, shaped by the legacy of apartheid and a democratic dispensation. It is a history that has constantly left the coloured community in a grey zone, grappling with the question of where do we belong. As Red September wrote in Liberated African, it is not the right of the state to categorize people. The state should not engage in any form of race classification or apartheid practices, even in the name of transformation. Yet even today, the legacy of categorization and division remains a heavy burden. What does it mean to be coloured in post-apartheid South Africa? This is not just a question of identity, but one of belonging, legitimacy, and justice. For far too long, coloured and Indigenous communities have felt underrepresented and marginalized. As Tessa Dooms and Lindsay Shuttle reminds us in their book, if we truly believe in redress, it must include tending to the need for belonging and legitimacy that coloured and Indigenous communities so desperately need. We are at a crossroad. We use the term coloured widely, but it carries with it the weight and history of oppression and confusion. The identity imposed by colonialism and apartheid to divide and control has been both a source of pain and in some ways reclaimed as a symbol of resilience because we've had to endure the most. To deny this identity would be to erase the lived experiences of millions of South Africans who claim and understand it. colored people have often been treated as in between, not fully black like you've heard, nie wit genoeg nie en ook nie swart genoeg nie, lost in the cracks of political discourse. The sense of being in between has left many colored communities feeling gravely excluded, still relegated to the margins of society, particularly in areas wrecked by gang violence, drug abuse, and poverty. We must ask ourselves, why are these communities still an afterthought? Why do they continue to feel disconnected from the shared vision of a democratic South Africa? The answer lies in the systemic neglect that has persisted. Colored identity may be a construct of division, but it is also a call for inclusion and for dignity and for recognition. We cannot allow policies or our politics to perpetuate the marginalization of any group. It is our responsibility to ensure that all colored communities, including colored and indigenous people, are seen, that we are finally valued and recognized in the broader vision of our nation. Honorable Speaker, let us foster belonging. Let us build a South Africa where every identity, no matter its history, can find its rightful place in our future. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable James. And we now have the Honourable Nkosi.
Thank you very much, Honourable Deputy Speaker. The African Renaissance, which has garnered significant momentum in South Africa and beyond, encompasses provisions for addressing the land rights and restitution of KHOI SAN land claims within our comprehensive land reform agenda. The distinctive historical oppression experienced by the KHOI SAN people should be integrated, incorporating their unique perspective into the ongoing discourse regarding African identity and development. It is of utmost importance to recognize the KHOI SAN's ancestral ties to the land and their marginalization during the colonial and apartheid periods. The KHOI SAN people of Southern Africa have established a profound spiritual and cultural bond with their ancestral lands, spanning millennia. This unique relationship is marked by a deep reverence for the land and its resources, with numerous sacred sites and landscapes holding significant resources with cultural value. In addressing land restitution claims for the KHOI SAN community, it is imperative to consider their customary and traditional land use practices. These practices often encompass seasonal migration patterns, communal ownership, and sustainable resource management. They are only fundamental to their cultural identity, but also embody comprehensive worldview that perceives human beings as interconnected with the natural environment. Acknowledging and honoring these traditional land use systems is crucial to ensuring that any restitution endeavors generally cater to the cultural and spiritual requirements of their KHOI SAN, rather than merely imposing Western notions of land ownership. The African National Congress has acknowledged the imperative of redressing the historical injustices endured by the KHOI SAN people, particularly with respect to land rights and cultural preservation. In alignment with the perspective, the ANC has advocated the measures to safeguard and conserve KHOI SAN heritage sites and historic landmarks, recognizing their significance to South Africa's indigenous history. The party has also endorsed initiatives aimed at facilitating the lodging of land claims by descendants of KHOI SAN and of KHOI SAN people, with the goal of rectifying past dispossessions and restoring ancestral lands. This approach is consistent with the broader objectives of South Africa's land reform program, which seeks to address historical dispossessions and advance equitable land distributions. Nevertheless, the implementation of these measures has proven to be intricate, entailing challenges related to conflicting claims, historical narratives, and the necessity to reconcile diverse stakeholder interests. The historical land ownership patterns in South Africa have been profoundly shaped by the country's legacy of racial segregation and apartheid. A pivotal piece of legislation, the 1913 Natives Land Act, imposed severe restrictions on Black South Africans' land ownership, initially limiting it to just 7% of the country's total land area, and later expanding to 13%. This racially discriminatory policy resulted in a significant disparity in land distribution that persists to this day. As of 2017, despite Black South Africans constituting about 80% of the population, they only owned 4% of the country's private rural land. In contrast, white South Africans, who make up less than 9% of the population, owned a staggering 72% of private farmland. This stark inequality is also evident in urban areas, where many Black South Africans are confined to overcrowded townships on the outskirts of cities. Following the end of apartheid in 1994, the government introduced a land reform program with the goal of redistributing 30% of white-owned agricultural land to Black farmers by 2014. However, as of 2020, only approximately 8% of the land have been successfully transferred, highlighting the formidable changes and slow progress in addressing the historical land ownership injustices in South Africa. Deputy Speaker, the African National Congress has encountered significant challenges in expediting the land claims processes in South Africa since assuming power in 1994. The party initially set an ambitious goal of returning 30% land to the original inhabitants by 2014, but this target proved unattainable. Substantially, delays in processing existing and claims have impeded progress, resulting in a backlog and frustration among claimants. To address these issues, the ANC government needs to prioritize enhancing efficiency with restitution procedure and implementing measures to combat corruption. This may involve streamlining administrative processes, increasing resources allocated to land claims offices, and strengthening oversight mechanism to ensure transparency and accountability. By expediting the land claims process, the ANC can work towards fulfilling its promise of land redistribution and addressing historical injustices stemming from apartheid-era land policies. The process of reconciliation and social cohesion in South Africa must address historical injustices suffered by the KHOI SAN, colored peoples, and other oppressed groups. Land restitution efforts and skills development support for KHOI SAN communities can play a crucial role. These initiatives provide economic opportunities and reconnect communities with their ancestral lands. The ANC emphasizes the importance of fostering national unity and addressing inequality through reconciliation, goes beyond economic empowerment and requires a multifaceted approach that includes cultural recognition. Honorable Deputy Speaker, in closing, political representation and ongoing dialogue, these efforts are vital in building a more inclusive and equitable society for all citizens. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And the next speaker is the Honourable Sali.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Assalamu alaikum to all. Honourable members, 30 years into democracy, it's appalling that our government still refuses to recognise the KHOI SAN and coloured communities, their unique identities and historical injustices. This deliberate omission perpetuates systematic inequalities, erases cultural heritages, and entrenches social economic disparities. The KHOI SAN indigenous people of this land were subjected to colonialism, forced removals, and cultural suppression. Their ancestral lands were stolen and their rights ignored. Today, we demand recognition, restitution, and justice. Colonizers dispossessed the KHOI SAN of their land, culture, and identity. Recognition is the first step towards rectifying these injustices. The broad Black category obscures the unique experiences and struggles of KHOI SAN and colored communities. Exclusion from policy decisions on land restitution, cultural preservation, and resource allocation perpetuates marginalization. Recognition must be accompanied by concrete measures to restore ancestral lands and address historical dispossession. Colonizers' descendants continue to control land stolen from KHOI and SAN and coloureds, perpetuating historical injustices. There appears to be a lack of will to resolve the concerns raised surrounding the KHOI SAN and to correct and compensate for the wrongs of the past. Why is it that in 30 years of democracy, the oldest inhabitants of South Africa are ignored while certain cultures and tribes have been recognized? Do we fear identification of the KHOI SAN because of a desire to continue colonization of their land for development purposes by the oppressor and to gatekeep their land rights? Why do we incorrectly identify in the manner of the colonizers? The recognition of the KHOI SAN and colored communities as African cannot just be verbal. The land expropriation and forced removals is documented. Why is our government reluctant to meaningfully engage with the KHOI SAN and coloureds to identify them correctly and to engage in the restoration of the inherent rights, their human rights? This is a disgrace. Our government should hold their heads in shame for holding on to discrimination of the colonizers, categorizing people as the colonizers did in little boxes. The right side of history is never the one which violates human rights. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Sali. And the next speaker is the Honourable Jacobs.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, today I give this speech on the shoulders of KHOI, SAN and coloured giants who laid down their lives for the freedoms we as Africans enjoy today. Ek is 'n kind van Kimberley en 'n klein kind van Graafrenet en ek weet vir 'n feit dat daar talle kleerlingkinders is wat, nes ekke, hul eie identiteite bevraagteken. Agbare Deputy Speaker, hierdie debat weerspieël wie ek werklik is. Dit gee dus vir my die kans om hierdie injustice reg te stel. Today we are participating in a debate that seeks to play its part in answering the national question. Today we answer the question as to how a subject who was once a victim of colonial oppression positions themselves in a post-colonial society. Today, we finally provide KHOI, SAN, and coloured people with a history-making debate that acknowledges our struggles, our heritage, and our existence. Honourable Deputy Speaker, as Haile Selassie put it, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, until basic human rights are guaranteed to all, without regard to race, the African continent will not know peace. Through this definition, we can see how the plight of what makes a black person is shared struggles, shared suffering, and shared aspirations. But when Jan van Riebeeck came to the Cape, he did not come for love and fresh air. He came to conquer and brutalize the KHOI and SAN people first. And I must correct the member of the Freedom Front Plus that van Riebeeck did not see a group of conformists and non-conformists. Heartlessly, in his journals, he called us all KHOI people, barbarians. With this notion in his heart, he built picket fences around rivers. He imprisoned, raped, and murdered my people and constructed concentration camps in the name of a large human trafficking business. What follows is that his company, the VOC, starts shipping more of my ancestors from across the Indian Ocean against their will. His company packed them into ships like sardines and transported them to the Cape, where they would be sold like items at the grocery shop. Honourable Deputy Speaker, as I illustrate these examples, my hope is that it becomes clear to this House that KHOI, SAN and coloured people have shared struggles with our brothers and sisters. We too have suffered at the hands of colonial powers. We too have struggled and waged war against the colonial project. Our struggle in resisting the Dutch, the British and the Portuguese was gruesome, bitter, icy and cold. It is far from any flow joke that could possibly be made. Our battles and our eventual victory against the apartheid regime have become a monument that is not recognized by government. With our shared struggles, suffering, and aspirations behind a better country than the one we were born into, it becomes undeniable that colored, Khoi, and San people are, whether you like
it. My apologies, Honourable Jacobs. The Honourable Member was just interrupting you. Please proceed.
But Honourable Deputy Speaker, who qualifies as an African? Academics typically define the markers of any identity as geographical ancestry, cultural heritage, historical experiences, and socio-political context. If this is the case, once more, Khoi, San, and colored people must be included as Africans in particular. Early mitochondrial DNA samples point toward Khoi and San people being inhabitants of Africa for thousands of years before colonialism. And it is the fact that colored people harbor this DNA. This DNA was found in Ethiopia, Namibia, and South Africa, and it agrees that a shared DNA is found within human remains across the continent. Honourable members, if you want a signal, geographically, we are African. And culturally, it is no misconception that the experiences of Khoi, San, and colored people also originated in Africa. With rock paintings in the Blombos and Kango caves, the First Nations mark is found there. And with colored people, our classification became our culture. It is a culture that is in the way that we talk, the way that we speak, the way that we are, and the liveliness of our neighborhoods. And this is also supported by our language, Afrikaans, which is a language that was born on this African continent that owes a significant amount of its creation to colored people. Honourable Deputy Speaker, with that being said, I must categorically state that our heroes deserve to be acknowledged and honoured in this house too. Owesome, known as Harry the Strandloper, doctored British sailors and traded at the Cape long before the Dutch came. It wasn't until Jan van Riebeeck that he was imprisoned. At the same time, he became the first person to escape Robben Island by boat, a Khoi man who, for the crime of his existence, was murdered by Jan van Riebeeck. Sarah Bartman, a Khoi woman, was captured and made to perform at freak shows merely because of how she looked. They mocked her as they do us today still. A Centre for Remembrance remains a disgrace, with money being stolen and a graveside's dignity being tarnished and disrespected. Abraham Eso, a colored man who was beaten, bludgeoned, and lashed with whips alongside the road of Calvinia. It gets worse. He was also shackled and dragged by horses for 8 kilometers before being beaten one more time and shot dead by a commando of the Orange Free State. My auntie, Marjoy Stewart, who nearly became the 5th member of the Craddock Four, a colored woman from Graafrenet, who was sentenced to solitary confinement by the apartheid regime for fighting against that ruthless regime. Honourable Deputy Speaker, I highlight these events because they are not isolated. They are part of a history that has been violently and deliberately silenced. My question is, why is it that struggle icons that are not Khoi, San, or colored have their legacies and stories that are widely known and spread? Why is it that we don't tell the whole truth to the entire nation? Why is it that only some memorials have dignity while some are incomplete, vandalized, and broken? Why is it that we must constantly look at reminders that we are not seen, that nobody cares about our history other than us? Why is it that Sarah Bartman is still having her dignity taken away from her for 200 years later? Hoekom is Owesome se geskiedenis nog steeds in die tronk? Why is it that Abraham Eso's history has been defaced as if it was dragged across tar? En hoekom beklei David Stuurman nog steeds teen kolonialisme? These experiences are experiences that are encoded in my DNA and the DNA of a great many in this house. A house that sits not more than 200 meters from a tree where my ancestors were auctioned for a penny, as if their lives meant nothing. So in 2024, we can't remain silent. We must make our voices thick in the name of our ancestors and those who are still living. It is not only about them, it is about the millions who are still living in poverty and isolation. We sing about mothers and fathers being kitchen girls and garden boys, but we don't acknowledge or tell the story of Kretoa, our Khoi mother who worked in Van Riebeeck's kitchen, my great-grandmother, Mam Pauline, who also worked in a kitchen. We don't tell the stories of our fathers who became bond servants on farms. We talk about this injustice of apartheid, but pretend as if colored, Khoi, and San people suffered a different apartheid. Some argued that colored people had representation, but I'm going to put the record straight. The overwhelming majority of colored people disapproved of the tricameral system of parliament. We talk about land dispossession, but we ignore who is systemically murdered by guns and pox that was brought to our shores by settlers. Ons maak asof ons fyn is, terwyl die Khoi, die San en kleerling mense nog steeds sukkel vir ons bestaansreg, terwyl ons bid dat dinge beter word. Honorable Deputy Speaker, as I close, if anyone in this House refuses to acknowledge that Khoi, San, and colored people are also Africans in particular, may the history books remember and record them as being tone deaf to a struggle that is over 500 years old. I would go as far as to say that they are complicit in continuing the crimes of the past. Because if you're unable to see the 500-year-old struggle of my people, you'll never be able to see me or my people. We cannot wholeheartedly move towards non-racialism if the existence of Khoi, San, and colored people is not considered an African existence. Achtbare Deputy Speaker, as ons saam staan, staan ons sterk. Maar as ons apart staan, staan ons swak. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Jacobs. And we now call on the Honourable Dugmore.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's clear that this is a critically important motion deserving thorough debate and clearly dialogue beyond the discussion this afternoon. The debate is about the issue of race in our country. It is a debate about the national question and the challenges we face as we seek to build a nation united in our diversity. And this debate is also about identity. It's clear that those who colonized and oppressed the majority of South Africans over centuries used violence, genocide, laws, propaganda, culture, religion, and education to not only dispossess the indigenous people of their land, but also to apply specific labels and categorizations which were aimed at further dividing the Black majority. As the ANC and as our colleagues in this debate have said, we are committed to the attainment of a national democratic society. We are not there yet, but all of our efforts are directed at achieving that. We remain committed to the unity of all South Africans, just as we remain equally determined to redress the injustices of the past. Unity and redress have to go hand in hand. They are not mutually exclusive. We seek a country where all of us can proudly identify as South African and African. It was President Mbeki who, in his statement on behalf of the African National Congress, on the occasion of the adoption by the Constitutional Assembly of the Republic of South Africa Constitution Bill in 1996, who said, and I quote, "I owe my being to the Khoi and the San, whose desolate souls haunt the great expanses of the beautiful Cape. They who fell victim to the most merciless genocide our native land has ever seen. They who were the first to lose their lives in the struggle to defend our freedom." Speaker, when one looks carefully at the formulation of this motion and its call on the executive and organs of state, we're compelled to ask Honourable Sauls, and possibly he'll do that when he responds, as to what particular legislative amendments of which laws is the Honourable Sauls proposing, because I think we need to get practical and focused on how we move from where we are. The term KHOI SAN, which in this motion is used as a single word, the way it's reflected on the order paper, is not a universally acceptable term, as it was created under conditions of genocide by the Germans against the Nama and the Klikung in concentration camps in Namibia. It was a German, Leonard Schultz Jenner, who incorrectly saw these two peoples, i.e. the Khoi and the San, with different histories, cultures, and languages as one race. Schultz Jenner referred to them as subhumans. The term carries much which is derogatory and assigns the San Aboriginal people as an appendage to the Khoi, and was never used as a name by any people in Southern Africa. The San Aboriginal peoples residing in 6 Southern African states amount to around 110,000 people, and they, as organized communities, have objected to use it in the academic arena and more broadly. So I would argue, Speaker, that it is correct and respectful to use the terms Khoi and San, and only for matters of common concern regarding discrimination and marginalization, to put them together in terms of KHOI SAN. For instance, and I would argue that the Traditional and KHOI SAN Leadership Act, which I think is evidence of what this government has actually done, albeit towards the second decade of democracy, and is evidence of focusing on this issue. And that bill is KHOI-SAN Leadership Act. And I think that gives recognition to the San and the KHOI people. But it's also evidence that this government has specifically acknowledged the need to provide for traditional and KHOI and San leadership. And that is a law that has been passed through this parliament. It is significant that the apartheid and colonial regimes never used the term African to describe the black majority. Instead, they divided Africans into two formations labeled as natives and coloreds, where this division was based on linguistics. When you look at the census of the Cape Colony in 1904, Africans were enumerated according to a range of African societies. And around 100 of these societies were then reconfigured by the colonial administration into 9 linguistic national groups: Xhosa, Sotho, Zulu, Tswana, Pedi, Venda, Ndebele, Swati, and Songa, and collectively called natives, as I've indicated. And the determining factor there, which was used by the colonial administration, was the Bantu family of languages. And those who spoke languages other than the Bantu family of languages, ranging from San and Ku languages to a range of African Asian languages associated with slavery and indentured labor, as well as Afrikaans and English, were called colored. After 1950, when the National Party came to power, those that had been classified as colored, as opposed to natives, were then further divided into Cape Colored, Malay, Griqua, other colored, Chinese, Indian, and other Asian. So, and then we had apartheid functionaries sitting in offices who allocated these subcategories by using a certain code number at the end of an allocated identity number. The apartheid regime then went on to change the term native, replace it with the term Bantu, and then in 1977 emerged with an apartheid notion of black, in inverted commas, when they passed legislation called the Black Local Authorities in the Act to cover the urban townships. So for this debate, let's remember that the apartheid regime rejected the use of the term African. And then on the other hand, in 1902, for instance, people who were later labeled as colored formed the African People's Organization, the APO, under the leadership of Dr. Abdurrahman and Matthew Fredericks. And it was in 1923 that the African National Congress adopted the term African, changing its name from the South African National Native Congress, which was formed in 1912, to become the African National Congress. And what makes the struggle for freedom in South Africa unique in comparison to other liberation struggles on the continent is the active participation of so-called national minorities in the liberation movement led by the ANC. Women such as Charlotte Maxeke, Dulcie September, Fatima Meer, Lillian Ngoyi, Helen Joseph, across different generations, across diverse communities, exemplify this. The ranks of Umkhonto weSizwe were swelled by cadres such as Basil February, Ashley Creel, Nicola Pedro, Robbie Waterwich, and Colleen Williams, to mention just a few. And these comrades had been classified by apartheid as colored. The principles of non-racism, non-sexism, and unity emerged from the crucible of struggle. We know about the Freedom Charter and its declaration that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, as well as the Freedom Charter talking about the notion of national groups having equal rights. So in the process of apartheid colonialism, in the process of the struggle, the issue of terminology and identify has been there, although the common theme is always the search for a national, democratic, and united society. The UDF was launched in '83, once again, which helped to consolidate the mass pillar of our struggle and saw leaders like Albertina Sisulu, Archie Gumede, Alan Busak, Billy Nair, Helen Joseph, Mildred Lucia, Valley Musa, Johnny Issel, Imam Hassan Solomons, coming together in their thousands with one voice to say, UDF unites, apartheid divides. It was at this time that the apartheid government attempted to deepen and divide and rule in terms of the black majority when they established a tricameral parliament. And this then relegated the black people to Bantustan, such as Ciskei and Transkei, and said that those that apartheid had classified as colored need to get a House of Representatives, those that had been classified as Indian, a House of Delegates with votes not equal to the old House of Assembly, which was for whites. We need to focus that the Constitution of our Republic recognizes the injustices of the past, honors those who suffered for justice and freedom, respects those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. But we have an important equality clause which states that to promote the achievement of equality, legislative and other measures designed to protect or advance persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination may be taken. This clause and others commit all of us to implement redress measures in support of all those who suffered unfair discrimination. So who are those that suffered unfair discrimination? Those that were classified as natives, those that were classified as colored, the KHOI and the SAN, and people of Indian origin who were classified as Asians, those who were forcibly removed, subjected to land dispossession, inferior education. And it's clear that in regard to the influence of the Black consciousness movement, the notion of the Black oppressed and the need for redress to broadly benefit all those that have been discriminated against as a Black majority. The democratic government, guided by the provisions of a constitution, has passed many laws to advance and protect those who suffered unfair discrimination. When we look at the actual definition in the Employment Equity Act, that act describes Black people as a generic term, which means Africans, coloreds, and Indians. And it's clear to me that in terms of the KHOI and the SAN, that would clearly be a category that needs to benefit from employment equity as it currently stands. We need then to look...
Doug Moore, unfortunately, your time has expired.
Thank you, Speaker.
It is now, I see the hand raised of the Honourable Kojani. Is that a point of order?
My apologies, Deputy Speaker. I wanted to confirm the time we have to close. Does it stand at 2 minutes? We just want to make sure we can get everything in the 2 minutes.
Correct. It is 2 minutes left for the Honourable Souls. And at that particular point, I then hand over to Honourable Souls to close the debate.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Speaker, and thank you to all the honourable members who have supported the motion. I do note with disappointment the non-support from the EFF, which does not consider coloureds as African based on the suffering, the degree of suffering. We suffered, we are still suffering. The fact is we suffered. The Honourable Boshoff, indeed, it is still relevant. The Honourable Dagmo, what laws? All laws that has to do with land reform, especially employment equity, as you just mentioned. It's not really about the term African, it's the fact that African in particular does not include colors. Employment equity, if we talk about employment equity, Richards Bay Minerals, as an example, 13 colors out of 1,776 total staff. That is not fair. And that is because colors are not considered African in particular. Therefore, we have the sense that in apartheid we were not white enough. Now in the new government, we are not Black enough. We are the owners of this land. And as owners, we want to share the land with everybody. We know no other land except South Africa. We are Africans in particular. We are not confused. We are interracially infused. We are a biological prototype of racial integration. We call on the executive government to recognize KHOI and SAN and colored people as African in particular. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Souls. Honourable members, that then concludes the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you.
Speaker, I object to the foolish analysis of Mr. Souls. We gave them an intellectual debate compared to the
Speaker, I believe that the discussion is actually closed, and I don't know whether there's opportunity for people now to begin to speak when you haven't given them permission to speak.
Mr. Paulson is out of order.
Thank you. Honourable members, thank you. As indicated, this debate has concluded. We will now move on to the last item on the order paper, which is a subject for discussion in the name of the Honourable Abrams on the ongoing fraud and corruption at the South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, and the entity's failure to protect the social grants of our most vulnerable citizens from corruption and mismanagement. I now recognize the Honourable Abrams.
Thank you, House Chairperson. SASSA is synonymous with fraud, corruption, mismanagement, snaking long queues, pensioners sleeping over in the queue to secure their spot for the following day, and tragically pensioners dying in queues. Visiting a SASSA office is certainly not a pleasant experience, but one made out of sheer desperation. Unauthorized deductions, the 390 million rand lost during the CPS scandal, paying deceased beneficiaries, paying government employees, system glitches which lead beneficiaries to either receive double payment or no payment at all, SAPO and Postbank inefficiencies, confusion over gold cards, black cards, and card expiry dates. The list of SASSA failures are endless. Since inviting the public to share their experiences regarding allegations of fraud within the SRD 370 grant, the DA has received over 150 emails from South Africans nationwide supporting the findings uncovered by 2 Stellenbosch University students. That there is an active SRD grant in their name against their ID number that they did not apply for, and despite reporting this to SASSA, they are still locked out of the grant despite being eligible. If I can share one example, open quote, I have 3 nephews and 1 niece who had just turned 18 years old who tried to apply for the SRD grant, and the system says application already active, but they didn't apply. Early January, we called SASSA customer care to report this, and the agent told us to give him the details of the application. They will send it to head office so they can cancel it. After cancellation, they will send us a text message so that we can reapply. But today, we have still not received any text message, close quote. Now, it is unfortunate that SASSA did not respond on this matter at yesterday's portfolio committee meeting, citing that their presentation would be inadequate. A strange response when SASSA has admitted fraud within this SRD grant is not new. It is nothing more than a delay tactic by the ANC and SASSA, who will now have another 30 days in which to do an internal investigation in order to spin the truth and avoid any further embarrassment of the minister themselves and this government, all while eligible recipients remain locked out of the grant, fraudsters continue to steal, and the public and stakeholders still have no answer. The payment of social grants account for approximately 96% of DST's annual budget. SASSA will receive 266 billion rand for this financial year. One would therefore expect the very best security systems be in place to prevent fraud and corruption, but clearly this is not the case. Is this by coincidence, incompetence, or by design? Is it by coincidence, incompetence, or by design that SASSA has failed to report allegations of fraud exceeding 100,000 rand to SAPS, as required by Section 34 of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, as highlighted by the Auditor General? Is it by coincidence, incompetence, or by design that the Chapter 4 Inspectorate for Social Assistance, as envisioned by the Social Assistance Act, an independent body whose primary function is to ensure the integrity of the social assistance framework, as well as to investigate fraud, corruption, and any forms of mismanagement and criminal activity within SASSA, still has no real capacity? Instead, SASSA established internal fraud investigation capacity through the Internal Fraud Management and Compliance Unit. Herein lies the problem and conflict. SASSA cannot audit itself. This fosters an environment ripe for fraud and corruption. By SASSA's own admission, the FMC became structurally unsuited to address the persistent leakage and concerted attacks on the social grant system. Despite government being aware of the need for a more robust and independent structure to tackle fraud and corruption, the proclamation on Chapter 4 was only achieved in 2024. Again, I'll ask House Chairperson, by coincidence, incompetence, or by design? Chairperson, as a Democratic Alliance, we make the following recommendations to address the ongoing fraud and corruption at SASSA. Funding and capacitation of the Independent Inspectorate for Social Assistance must be prioritized. The resignation of the SASSA CEO, the leadership of this entity must be held accountable. A SIU investigation into the ongoing fraud and corruption at the entity. DSD cannot investigate its own entity. A commission of inquiry into the SRD 370 grant payment system, a complete review of the SRD 370 system, modernization of the IT security, payment, and biometric verification system, and we call for real consequence management with penalties and jail time, which do in fact act as a deterrent These criminals, whether they are found within government or not, belong in jail. The empowerment of SASSA beneficiaries by aggressive education and awareness campaigns on how to protect themselves from and how to report fraud and corruption. And lastly, House Chair, we need political will to root out corruption. DA executive members have demonstrated that there is no department too broken after 30 years of mismanagement and corruption which cannot be fixed. The key difference is whether or not the relevant minister has the political will to do so. The predecessors of DSD have left much to be desired. Minister Tulashi, are you finally the minister to prioritize the needs of the vulnerable above the greed of the corrupt? Thank you, House Chairperson.
Thank you. I now recognize the Honourable the Minister of Social Development as the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair, honorable members and fellow South Africans. Today, I stand before you to address the matter of utmost importance, which is fraud and corruption and the impact it has on the income security of our most vulnerable citizens, who rely on social grants as their primary source of income to make ends meet. We are tasked with the important mandate of ensuring that through the South African Social Security Agency, to stand in the gap to protect these grants and ensure that they reach their intended beneficiaries. Honorable Chair, before I delve deep on the SASSA matters, I would like to share some information from the South African Banking Risk Information Center, which has highlighted the loss experienced by the banking system in the 2023 year. This year alone, South Africa lost almost 3.3 billion rands from fraud committed by cyber criminals and identity theft. The same report indicates that armed robbery for the state institution has gone down. And Chair, SASSA does take these in considerations, these that are very abnormal, very seriously. Hence, it has taken a decision to have alternative payments of grants. Chair, let us recognize and accept the decision to switch to the banking cards for our beneficiaries. We know and accept the fact that we know you need to use this opportunity to educate our citizens to be vigilant and be wise on issues of identity theft and fraudulent use of their information. Honorable Chairperson, the Social Grants Program is our government's largest and most successful anti-poverty intervention, covering a total of 28 million beneficiaries. This success has been recognized the world over and has even won international awards from prestigious institutions such as International Social Security Association, which commands a membership of 320 social security institutions from 120 countries across the globe. I must, Honorable Chair, say, as we are articulating this, SASSA and DST, we are not complacent. With a budget of 260 billion paid into accounts of vulnerable older persons, children and persons with disability, we understand the important role we play in starving off poverty and hunger among our people. The SRD grant makes up of 35 billion of the total allocation and covers an average of 8 million working age adults each month. Over the past 3 decades, South Africa has made significant strides in establishing and expanding its social grant system. From these early days of democracy, our government recognized the critical needs to support those who are most vulnerable in our society. Social grants have become a lifeline for millions of South Africans, providing essential financial support to the elderly, children, and people with disability. And in recent years, working age individuals who are unable to secure income from employment are also benefiting out of this SRD grant. The introduction of Child Support Grant, Honorable Chair, in 1998 marked a pivotal moment in our social security landscape. This grant has grown to support over 12 million children, ensuring that they have access to basic necessities and opportunities for a better future. Similarly, the old age pension and disability grant have provided dignity and financial stability to millions of our senior citizens and persons with disability. Our social grants are not merely a financial handout, we must say, Chair. They are a fundamental constitutional right and a foundational component on a social safety net. They play a crucial role in reducing poverty and inequality, ensuring that all South Africans have the opportunity to live with dignity. For many households, social grants are the primary source of income, enabling them to meet basic needs such as food, shelter, and healthcare. Moreover, social grants have a multiple effect on the economy by providing financial support to the most vulnerable. We stimulate local economies as recipients spend their grants on goods and services within their communities. This, in turn, supports small businesses and creates jobs, contributing into the overall economic growth. Secondly, it highlighted the need for better collaboration between various government departments and agencies through data, various, and consistent communication. Lastly, it is highlighting the need for increased vigilance and agility within department to ensure that we can respond with speed to prevent any leakage in the social grant system. Chair, on fraud, it is essential to distinguish between fraud and corruption. As we address these issues, fraud involves deceit or trickery to gain an unfair advantage, often for personal gain. It is not only a crime against those that have had their identity stolen, but also a crime against the agency and government. Corruption, on the other hand, it involves abuse of power by those in position of authority for personal benefit. Both are detrimental to the integrity of our social security system and must be addressed with equal vigor. Honorable members, I stand before you with a firm commitment to ensure that any corruption within SASSA will be dealt with decisively. We will implement stringent measures to detect, prevent, and punish corrupt activities. This includes enhancing our oversight mechanism, increasing transparency, and holding accountable those abuse their positions of power. Furthermore, we leave no stone unturned in our efforts to combat fraud against the agency. We've already made investments in advanced technologies and data analytics to detect fraudulent activities, and will continue to strengthen these to be able to act more swiftly. We'll also strengthen our collaboration with law enforcement agencies to ensure that those who commit fraud are brought to justice. SASSA fully supports sting operations conducted by SAPS and National Credit Regulator. The Fusion Center set up by Presidency, which consists of financial intelligence, the National Prosecuting Authority, and DPSA. We all support this initiative. Furthermore, SASSA is strengthening its anti-fraud and corruption implementation plan that is built on the foundation of SASSA's fraud prevention strategy. This strategy provides clear and detailed procedures to address control deficiency and outline specific activities at the personnel responsible for their execution. The plan is designed to ensure that all measures are in place to protect the integrity of our social grant systems. Chair, the plan is structured around 4 pillars, which are prevention, detection, investigation, and resolution. First one, which is prevention. This pillar focuses on reducing the likelihood of fraud occurring through sound policies, managing conflicts of interest, continuous anti-fraud and corruption awareness campaigns, and fostering an ethical culture within the agency. Key activities include financial disclosure, lifestyle reviews, and the key implementation of a beneficiary biometric system to mitigate the risk of grant fraud, which is one of the most important ones. On detection, early detection measures are crucial for identifying the presence of fraud and corruption. This includes internal and external audits, reports from whistleblowers, and self-reporting mechanisms. The plan emphasizing the importance of maintaining corruption-free database and implementing robust whistleblowing and reporting mechanisms. The investigation. Upon the occurrence of or suspicion of fraud, thorough investigations are conducted. These investigations aim to implement consequence management measures which may involve law enforcement agency where appropriate. The plan highlights the need to cooperation with other agencies and strengthening of our investigation capacity. The last one, the resolution. Post-investigation activities focus on hearing the matter and pursuing findings. It is essentially for institutions to recover losses suffered and take disciplinary actions based on the finding from internal investigation. Matters may be resolved internally or referred to courts of law for criminal prosecution. In addition, Honorable Chair, to these measures, I wish to report that the department has now taken steps to finalize the establishment of Inspectorate for Social Assistance during this financial year. We view this as a critical institution to strengthen our capacity to conduct robust, comprehensive, and invasive investigation, to tackle the sophisticated fraud syndicate, and collaborate more closely with other law enforcement agencies to speed up prosecution. On the protection, we must ensure that social grants are distributed fairly and efficiently, reaching those who need them most. This required a commitment to transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement of our system and processes.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Your time is now expired.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Ndlela.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me turn my video on.
Honourable Ndlela, when you turned on your video on my side, the video froze. So it might call for you to rather not turn on the video.
I wish to draw from a report by Liebenberg and Tilly in 1998 in a monograph by Trusha Reddy and Andile Sokomani. It highlights the following. It says, and it is prudent for us to reflect on how the apartheid's pejorative ideology was manufactured into a fully operationalized system of exclusion and discrimination. This in of itself was a form of corruption and was buttressed by other more traditional forms of corruption. When the Union of South Africa in 1910 was formed, it was the toughest and most discriminatory for non-white population. The welfare of child care grants, unemployment, and old age pensions were specifically and specially for whites and coloreds only, whilst the apartheid system's characterization prejudiced women, effectively only allowing white women in their 60s to benefit for old age pensions, to the exclusion of Blacks and Indians, who were deliberately excluded. Now, this was done with the pretense that there would be, as a safety net, familial support that would suffice as a basic social security for the Blacks and Indians. The construction of the basic security net, which was when at that time established in 1937, was known as the means test pensions and disability grants issuance. Pensions were finally paid to all 10 institutes for security studies, curbing corruption in social welfare rates groups, but with stark discriminatory undertones. For instance, when the country became a republic in 1961, the highest white pensions were 5 times larger than Black pensions. And this was, again, by Liebenberg and Tilly in 1998 in a report. Now, what's interesting is that this trend worsened progressively until 1961 and was marked by administrative delays, corruption, and inefficiency, particularly in rural areas, which were a form of covert discrimination for the disenfranchised communities. Now, this stagnation continued into the capitalist economy into the 1970s as the apartheid state started accepting the need to incorporate Black people into the system. The apartheid government, and reluctantly so, attempted in the provision of social assistance reforms as regulatory rules were relaxed and more people were incorporated, that being the Blacks and the Indians. Now, as more people entered the system, white pensioners were indirectly reduced, being left at the same level, or were increased at a lower rate than the pensions for other groups because of the fiscal strain that this caused on the system. Indeed, economists at the time warned that improved coverage of Black people may put at risk the financial fiscal viability. And this was also reported by Van der Berg, funny enough, in 1994. Now, in comes modern day age, post-democracy and in this new dispensation. Chairperson, I can share that I had the privilege of having interfaced with social development at the time when Minister Zola Skweyiya, who was the founding minister of SASSA, the Social Security Agency at the time, when we embarked on a project in 2005, 2006 thereof. It was a pilot project that was implemented where we used data quality management and data cleansing principles. And we worked closely with the State Information Technology Agency, R&D, CETA R&D. And what we did was we used means tests, manually so, to determine fraudulent grant recipients. And these yielded reports, amongst others, of 180,000 public servants that were flagged as having received social grants from the SOCPEN system. At the time, remember, this is, as I mentioned, before even SASSA was established. This was just social development. Now, the simple methodology that was used to cross-reference the various data dumps that we had and we received from the various departmental databases, such as your Home Affairs PERSEL, which is the government employee salary payment system, CIPRO, today called CIPC, for the owners of directors of companies. As you would know, if you're a director of a company, you ought to not be receiving a grant. So we use that kind of information and the ID numbers thereof by cross-referencing to identify people who were receiving grants yet owned companies. SARS, in terms of people who are paying tax, as you would know, when you're a grant recipient, you don't pay tax. So obviously, if you are paying tax and you're in the SARS system, we would have to flag you as to why are you receiving a grant. The same if you were in the correctional services inmate system. Why are you in prison yet receiving a grant? So all these were really the basics of how you implement using a means test and simple methods of methodologies and technology to identify crime, to identify fraudulent activities, to identify even fraud ghost grant recipients. This report of the 180,000, I remember, I presented it to Minister Skweyiya at the time, long time ago, over 15 years ago, might I say. And the founding minister, Minister Skweyiya of SASSA, stated the following, and this was a very genius move of his. The first step, he had said, was that we needed to grant amnesty to those that knowingly were defrauding and those that were receiving grants illegally. And he did so for 60 days to 90 days, if I recall. The states, just during that period, saved close to $1 billion, if not 1.2 billion, in that period alone. Now, even with the 180,000, let me go back to that. The 180,000 public servants that were flagged, let's not forget that naturally, because of the social situation in our country, public servants also are foster care parents. So there were those that were obviously given the green light, understood as to why they were receiving grants on behalf of the children that they were fostering. But also, there were those public servants that were receiving grants fraudulently and illegally. If we were to clean up the system, it needs to start with us. Because, Chairperson, the reality that we're dealing with here within SASSA is that we are dealing with syndicates, and those syndicates work with the grant administrators who are the ones that capture these illegal IDs and these illegal fraudulent activities in our system. They are the true enablers of the fraud and the corruption that we find ourselves in as the state. Now, social development today, it is scary to me because at that time, when we discovered exactly this kind of methodology and we discovered all these reports, we then realized that we had to automate the system. And then we came up with a project that was called Project Dossier. And the minister can go and refer to the archives, she'll find this project. This project was whereby we used the same methodologies and we automated the system. We got it classified by CETA, by the National Intelligence Agency at the time. And with that, we then went about the implementation of the system. Unfortunately, due to politicking and short-sighted, gluttonous activity and views, the project was stopped. This project was codenamed Dossier because it meant exactly that. It was a Department of Social Services Information Exchange Register, whereby the system would be able to take your identity, cross-reference it and check it with all the departments that I've just mentioned and confirm whether or not you're eligible based on the means test and based on the grants type for a specific grant or not. Now, it scares me, very scary, quite honestly, and should be for South Africans, that SASSA and social development today talk about a fraud prevention strategy 15, 18 years later, when there was cutting-edge technology then at that point in time that could address this issue. I'm saying this is totally unacceptable, and quite honestly, the minister and the SASSA officials, specifically the SASSA officials, need to really jack up and ensure that they implement a system that now overhauls and transforms digitally the SOCPAN system, so that it has the business intelligence and the artificial intelligence to prick up implement preventative measures proactively to identify potential fraudulent applications. When it comes to the issue of the same system, it should be able to do continuous monitoring, lifestyle audits, and also take all that information and integrate it into SAPS or the relevant security cluster entities that deal with these kind of issues. Now, we speak about fraud that is also occurring. We've got a government printing works, Chairperson, that prints security-based identity cards. The same government printing works should be printing our cards, our SASSA cards. Why must we get foreign entities to be printing those cards when we ourselves could be printing our own SASSA payment card and even include our own payment platform on that card? Today, MasterCard, Minister would know.
Honorable Ndlela, unfortunately, your time has run out.
And thank you very much, Chairperson. I think the MasterCard fees is the biggest issue of cost. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Masango.
Thank you, Honorable House Chairperson. I wish to commend Honorable Abrams for introducing the debate on the ongoing fraud and corruption at SASSA and the entity's failure to protect the social grants of our most vulnerable citizens from corruption and mismanagement. The topic of this debate is an indictment on the Department of Social Development, its minister, and the Portfolio Committee on Social Development. I say this, Honorable Chair, because I've had the honor of serving on this committee, and we've been raising the issues of alleged fraud and corruption at SASSA for a long, long time. We've even offered solutions, yet just recently, such allegations reared their ugly head again. This time by two students who not only found grant fraud committed in their own names, but also started to the fact that the fraud is potentially happening at a massive scale and must be addressed immediately. I would like House Chairperson to quote from the good book in the Gospel of Luke chapter 12 and verse 48, and I quote, "To whom much is given, much will be required." You might want to know why I am quoting this verse. This, Chairperson, is because the Department of Social Development receives no less than R250 billion per year on behalf of the poor and vulnerable of this country, with about 45% of the South African population receiving social grants. This is a huge responsibility for the Honourable Minister to ensure services by her department and its entities reach those for whom they are intended. The reason why we have this debate today is partly because year after year, the Auditor General, this country's supreme audit institution, has highlighted SASSA's poor management, its failure to prevent irregular expenditure, its payment to ineligible beneficiaries, and its failure to provide sufficient evidence that targets have been met, and insufficient oversight from the leadership, not to mention consequence management that is at its all-time low. Honorable House Chairperson, let me take this House through a summary of reports over the last 5 years by the AG on the issues plaguing SASSA. 2018-2019, compliance with laws and regulations was not continuously monitored, resulting in non-compliance with procurement processes, consequence management, and irregular expenditure not prevented. The next year, key findings included failure to present 102 million rand irregular expenditure, procurement of and contract management failures, and insufficient evidence of consequence management against officials for irregular expenditure. 2020-2021, slow response in improving internal controls and addressing risk areas, irregular and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and crucially, with regards to SASSA's network security, firewall rules were not adequately restricted and allowed access to clear text protocols. 2021-2022, failure to prevent irregular expenditure, failure to review and monitor compliance with procurement legislation, failure to maintain a system of adequate record keeping and payments to ineligible individuals. 2022-2023, failure to prevent 21 million rand in irregular expenditure. And then this year, failure to prevent irregular expenditure, payments to ineligible individuals again. We can delve deeper into these issues with the following examples from the AG's report. In April 2018, SASSA made a payment of social assistance fees to a service provider concerning grant payments to beneficiaries. The service provider was not entitled to these fees because SASSA had made the relevant grant payments directly to the beneficiaries' bank accounts. The payment for services not rendered to the entity had resulted in non-compliance with the PFMA. Disregarding the laws of this country is a fertile ground for fraud and corruption to thrive, especially when consequence management is totally absent. When it comes to specifically the SRD grant, the AG reported in 2022 that SASSA's outdated, limited databases and inadequate verification controls resulted in people who were not in distress receiving the grant, while those who were in distress were sometimes unfairly rejected. Honorable House Chairperson, payment of ineligible beneficiaries has been a permanent feature of the AG's report on SASSA. It has confirmed the Portfolio Committee members' deep concerns about the most desperate applicants being locked out of the life-saving grants in favor of ineligible applicants. Between 2020 and 2021, SASSA made payments to ineligible individuals who were not entitled to the SRD grant COVID-19, then 350 grand, because internal controls were inadequate and validation and prevented payments to ineligible person. Another year, another non-compliance with the PFMA as SASSA failed to maintain effective, efficient, and transparent systems of financial and risk management and related internal controls. At the back of these grave lapses in following established laws and regulations are rands and cents that wind up in wrong pockets, further impoverishing the poor and vulnerable. In coming with solutions to this serious challenge, we call for the Minister and the Department to, without delay, strengthen its oversight mechanisms over SASSA and for timelines to be attached to consequence management processes. As the committee, we have decided to have the issue of consequence management as a standing portfolio committee agenda item. We welcome the recent expansion of the AG's powers to allow them to, among others, refer material irregularities to relevant public bodies in law enforcement for further investigation, to recommend actions in the audit report to resolve the material irregularities. The thread of failure in SASSA runs through all the years, as highlighted by the AG. It's a failure of leadership who failed to implement effective controls to ensure accurate reporting, failed to enforce compliance with legislation, and failed to regularly review and update SASSA's risk register. And in so doing, SASSA is failing the very people they exist to serve, the country's poorest and most vulnerable. I thank you, Honorable House Chairperson.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Tafeni.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Chairperson, the social relief measures we have as a country are so crucial that at times this grant become the only measures preventing complete starvation in some households. Over 17 million people depend on these grants, costing the state billions in rents. It is a shame that the state has not paid any attention on making this facility corruption-free. That two first-year computer science students at the University of Stellenbosch were able to detect the depth of the corruption in the issuing of these social grants, lays bare the lack of safeguard in the system. Enable fraud and corruption are detected, costing the state billions of rents. The findings by the two Stellenbosch University students of fraud and corruption of SASSA are further supported and supplemented by the findings and opinion of the Auditor General of South Africa, who on the 2023-2024 financial year audit report concluded that SASSA still continues to make SRD grants payment to ineligible beneficiaries. It is treasures that SASSA has allowed this to happen and that they continue running away from taking responsibility by the blaming weak IT system, which they claim were as a result of rubbish nature of the SRD grants. But SASSA has had 4 years of implementing SRD grants, and it is so acceptable that they do not have the necessary means to safeguarding public money against the practices today. The problem in the SASSA itself as an institution has long been captured by corrupt element from the ANC, and they have been using this entity as a cash cow for far too long. To this day, the entity has still not recovered the 74 million overpaid to a service provider for purpose of social assistance fees. To say the least, and there remains this trend of making overpayments to service provider for no apparent reason other than the corruption itself. The 2018 case involving one of SASSA's local officials in the Eastern Cape who made false representation in order to grant applications and payments to the tune of 1.8 million in social grant is one of the examples of fraud and corruption which continues at SASSA on a daily basis. Despite this little of cases, there has been no intervention by the successive Minister of Social Development. And to this day, the system remains so weak that fraudsters are allowed to slip out through the law enforcement net without being caught, and resulting in the Department of Social Development losing money at such a horrid fashion. Despite SASSA recovering 1.148 million in SRD grant paid to ineligible applicant, it's not clear how much was lost in the process of recovering these monies. It is also not clear whether at the end of the day, the correct beneficiaries were subsequently paid their 350 grants. This remains so because in her last audit report, the AGSA found that as a result of SASSA not having a process in place to record information relating to beneficiaries' inquiries, it then became difficult to track inquiries and disputes that were recovered and subsequently resolved or not resolved the ended. Certainly, at the end of it all, it is the poor and the marginalized of our people who remain at the mercy of a dysfunctional grant payment system, which is made weak by those controlling the state apparatus whose intention is to rob the poor and enrich the politically connected who are aligned to the ruling ANC. We call on the president to issue a proclaim mandating the Special Investigation Union truly investigate the corrupt in relation to this grant as SASSA. This must be done as soon as ultimate responsibility for this. It is a complete abrogation of duty for the minister to fold arms while this is going on at SASSA. In normal democracies, the minister would have been fired already by now. She is not fired because the ruling rich elites have normalized taking money belonging to the public for their own private interest. Parliament itself must take its responsibility of holding the executive to account very seriously and institute investigation on the extent of the rot at SASSA. The EFF will remain resolute in its defense of the interest of the poor and the marginalized against the training of the corruption. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Machi.
Thank you, House Chairperson. House Chairperson, the IFP is deeply concerned about the ongoing fraud and corruption within the South African Social Security Agency, which is SASSA, which continues to hinder the social grants meant for our country's most vulnerable citizens, despite SASSA's critical role in providing essential support. Its failure to safeguard these funds from corruption and mismanagement is unacceptable and undermines the trust of the very people it is meant to serve. Social grants were never intended to create long-term dependence, but rather to serve as a temporal safety net for families in times of need. The IFP's approach in the communities we govern focuses on empowering people through skills development, education, and training, ensuring that grants recipients are equipped to re-enter the economy and become self-reliant. It is still vital that the system provides sufficient support and remains protected from corruption, as it would have a severe impact on poor and vulnerable households. Consider the unemployed graduate looking to get to their next interview but cannot access it due to inefficiency in the system. By rooting out fraud in SASSA, we can ensure that social assistance is not a permanent crash, but a stepping stone towards self-sufficiency. We cannot let corruption undermine this vital system. Social grants must provide sufficient support, allowing people not just to survive, but to emerge stronger. To do this, we need to root out corruption in SASSA and foster local businesses to grow the economy. I thank you, House Chairperson.
Thank you. Is there a member of the PA who will represent the party in this debate? If not, then we move on to the Honorable Dr. Boshoff.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Now, the whole question of SASSA is of critical importance for the whole of South Africa, because SASSA and the social grants in a very real sense stand between the country and social unrest, which could destroy order and stability within the country and within the economy. Now, one could ask why that is the case. And it's because the formal economy is not large enough and does not have the ability to really absorb the economically active population. Therefore, SASSA and social grants for people who are actually not old or indisposed in a way that would require social assistance in a normal economy creates a labor reservoir with people who are kept barely alive until they are needed. It sounds eerily familiar if one reads the South African history. Now, can people actually live on SASSA? And I believe the answer is no. But how do they? The missing link is the highly underestimated informal economy in South Africa, which plays a much larger role than is normally acknowledged, and one should be sure to notice, to which SASSA significantly contributes by the expenditure of these pensions. Now, if we ask why the fraud, which is such a characteristic of SASSA, the first reason is because so much money flies around. There's just so much money which has to be paid to so many people, to millions of people, and identity theft in South Africa, as we learned, is not a very difficult thing to do. Now, to fix the SASSA system to prevent the Stellenbosch University students' private investigation to make similar investigations from private people impossible is actually just the covering of a warning light. In fact, the whole existence of SASSA in the form that it presently does is in itself the covering of a warning light of the South African economy. It makes one think about the idea of a basic income grant, which apparently has much currency within the government circles. And that would mean that South African citizenship would be worth X amount per month. Now, that's basically an invitation to even more fraud and more identity, let's call it appropriations. Now, how to deal with this is, in the first place, that employment has to be fixed in South Africa. The informal sector has to play a much more important role, which has to be recognized as such, to really make the economy grow. And then macroeconomical factors should be more favorable for economic growth. Now, it is true that there can be economic growth without increased employment, but there cannot be increased employment without economic growth. Therefore, that is actually the beginning of solving this problem. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Beasley.
Sorry, Honourable Chair, on a point of order. It's Honourable Thring. Thank you, Chair. Chair is not wanting to disturb my colleague because what I'm about to raise is no fault of his. But I've noticed that on all of the mini plenaries, the UDM has been placed above the ACDP. The ACDP is the 10th largest party, followed by the UDM. And I think that this may be just a administrative error by the officials who arranged the mini plenaries. So I would ask that in future if that could be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Thring. Yes, we will certainly attend to that. Honourable Beasley, although I see Honourable James there, are you representing Action SA?
Yes, I am, Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Honourable Speaker, members of this House, SASSA was created with a noble mandate, and that is to ensure fair and efficient distribution of grants to the most vulnerable of our people. Those who rely on these grants to put food on the table, send their children to school, and cover the most basic living needs. Instead of providing the relief and dignity SASSA has become a playground of fraud, a feeding through of corruption, and a golden standard of gross mismanagement. We have seen what began as a trickle of scandals turn into a flood of corruption. The list of wrongdoings is long as it is damning. Ghost beneficiaries siphoning funds, fraudulent payouts made to private bank accounts, and officials using their positions to enrich themselves at the expense of the poor. These are the symptoms of a deeply entrenched rot within the system. We applaud the group of first-year students at Stellenbosch University who exposed a massive fraud scheme involving SASSA. However, I must mention, we have emails from September 2023 from Bonnie Sons and Elizabeth Reuters who informed SASSA of this exact issue of grant already active when new beneficiaries tried to apply. What consequences are there and were there? None. SASSA clearly does not have the capability or the capacity to confront this issue, and there is now a need for new leadership. There's a failure of governance at SASSA, a failure to ensure effective oversight, implements stringent internal controls, and ultimately and most painfully to protect the citizens that this agency has created to serve. We cannot stand by while most vulnerable in our society suffer at the hands of criminals who exploit them. Corruption must be rooted out, and those responsible for misappropriation of funds must face the full might of the law, including those who failed to act. Honorable Speaker, there's a deeper concern here. What does this say as a society when we allow this kind of exploitation to persist? Why is it that as we as a country tolerate the robbing of our most vulnerable citizens? This reflects a malice in our society that preys on the weak, normalizes corruption, and renders us unable and unwilling to act decisively. Members of this august House, sadly, too often we fall short of the responsibility within our own ranks. In conclusion, the SASSA grant system is not a privilege, it's a lifeline to millions of South Africans. It must be safeguarded. We owe it to the pensioners, the single mothers, the disabled, the unemployed to act now. Let us commit ourselves once again to eradicating corruption in all its forms, in entities we oversee within our very own honorable ranks. Let us work together to strengthen institutions, restore public trust, most importantly, protect the dignity and lives of millions of South Africans. I thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Kwangpa. Is there somebody else who will represent the UDM? If not, then we move on to the Honorable Thring.
Thank you, Honorable House Chairperson. The ACDP is cognizant of the critical issue of ongoing fraud and corruption within the South African Social Security Agency. The salient word here is ongoing. It is 2 years since the former Minister Zulu revealed that over R500 million was lost in 10 years due to the activities of some 1,174 people, many of them in SASSA, employed by SASSA. The SASSA annual report for 2023-24 financial year revealed that it pays grants to 28 million South Africans. National Treasury's 24 budget shows that some 7.4 million individuals in South Africa pay income tax. This is nothing to brag about. Rather, it is a shameful admission of the failure of government to grow our economy and to create jobs. SASSA, entrusted with the welfare of our most vulnerable citizens, has failed to safeguard social grants from systemic corruption and mismanagement. This not only undermines public trust, but also deprives deserving beneficiaries of essential support. Furthermore, the agency's inability to implement robust security measures has led to significant data breach. It is evident that SASSA's internal controls and data hygiene are grossly inadequate. Data breaches expose beneficiaries to identity theft and further exploitation. The lack of accountability and transparency within SASSA exacerbates these issues, allowing corrupt practices to flourish unchecked. SASSA's mitigation that it has recouped some 150 million in social relief of distress grant payments made to ineligible beneficiaries, though welcome, is minimal. The ACDP calls for the scrutinizing of SASSA's operational framework and identifying the root causes of its failure. Additionally, we call on the new Portfolio Committee to follow up on the clear evidence of mismanagement of funds at best and gross corruption at worst, particularly forbidden payments made to SASSA and Postbank employees. The ACDP furthermore calls for immediate verification processes to be implemented to verify the eligibility of beneficiaries for the partnering with the State Information Technology Agency to interface financial systems. We must demand that the new government exercises stringent oversight mechanisms and enforces prosecution for those involved in corrupt activities with SASSA. SASSA has failed vulnerable South Africans, and only through comprehensive reform can it regain its integrity and ensure that social grants reach those genuinely in need. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Kwankwa, I've been alerted to the fact that you are on the platform. I don't know whether you experienced some technical difficulties when I called you earlier. I will give you another opportunity. If not, we go on to the Honorable Ghana.
Nakenza mthoma xitulu River Rise Mzansi Kensa Nkarlo mnganyika wo. I want to start this my contribution to this debate by stating that we need to acknowledge the work that SASSA does in ensuring that it is able to dispense grants to the elderly, to the people with disabilities, and the unemployed through the SRD grants. We know that almost 30 million social grants are paid every month to people we know and constituents that we serve and that we deserve assistance from the state. But these numbers on their own and the people behind them point to a collective failure on our part and the part of the government to build an economy that creates jobs and opportunities. With only, as you know, 7.4 million South Africans that are paying income tax. So this is something that we need to look at so that we build an economy that expands the middle class and reduces the number of people dependent on social security. So given the nature of this debate, I want to focus on the second point, So we know that we are running out of money. So the fiscals cannot afford leakages, especially in a space that's supposed to benefit the most vulnerable people in our society. As we do know, and it was pointed out by various honorable members about the case of the two first-year students from Stellenbosch, who exposed the weakness of the SASSA system itself. They showed that the security aspect, insofar as SASSA is concerned, is very missing. We do know that this is not the only case, Chairperson. We know of cases of over 100 million rand scheme of cloned SASSA cards. So that have been reported. And these are shameless cases of theft from the poor. People are unashamedly stealing from poor South Africans, and they are stealing from all of us and stealing from the state. And it requires serious intervention from all role players. And the work of the Social Development Committee needs to be applauded in this regard. But one of the things that we need to look at, as you know that I've raised this issue, is that is the issue of gambling, which I know that the minister said no, it does not fall under a ambit. But as the Minister of Social Development, the increasing number of SASSA recipients that are from the mega assistance received from the state, it's used for gambling, should concern us. And one of the things, that's the last thing, Chair. So we do know that if if SASSA collapses, as a country, we will face an even bigger problem than the one that we, at the moment, we are trying to save or to solve on a daily basis. And to Minister Tolashe, we say, please wake up, get moving for the sake of all the grant recipients in the South.
Thank you, Honorable Ghana. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is the Honorable Ramahila.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start by saying we are obviously dealing with outcomes of a purposeful action that are not intended or foreseen in so-called unintended consequences. We will recall that the SRD system was made in response to the dire conditions created by COVID-19 pandemic and meant to provide immediate financial relief to citizens. And would like to appreciate the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa in this regard. However, we have come to witness fraudsters exploiting the flexible nature of the system. In this regard, we implore SASSA to continue to find mechanisms to strengthen its system, which delicately consider the diverse background and access that beneficiaries have to skills and resources such as smartphones, data, Wi-Fi, and digital literacy. As a caring government, meeting our citizens where they are and giving them convenience must be our number one priority when we provide goods and services to them. Further, Chair, where officials are complicit and found implicated in contributing to the fraud and corruption at SASSA, which steals from the public and robs resources meant for the most poor and vulnerable in our society, we call on the full might of the law to fall upon them. As the African National Congress, we are committed to uphold the principles of accountability and transparency. We advocate for ethical conduct and have zero tolerance for fraud and corruption. And this, Chair, as members of the African National Congress serving in the Portfolio Committee, we took charge and were in charge of making sure that the Portfolio Committee resolved to ensure that all the legacy material irregularities that have not been attended to should be referred to Chapter 9 institution. These demonstrate the level at which the ANC is committed to fight fraud and all the related issues. As the ANC, it has been our historic mission to ensure that we develop a government which strives for a just society where all citizens are empowered and given the necessary support and opportunity to realize their full potential. It is in this regard that over the past 30 years, we have established one of the world's biggest social welfare systems where millions of South Africans are supported who make up 45% of the population. And in this regard, I want to say, Chair, bravo to the African National Congress for having repealed and redressed what apartheid has done to the poor people of South Africa. Repealed a racialized social pension distribution by the apartheid system. We must remember this African National Congress. That's why even at the beginning I said we're dealing with outcomes of a purposeful action. The grants are not merely financial injections, but have proven to have a positive correlation to impoverish health and educational outcomes and overall contribution to positively improving the quality of life of many. Furthermore, social grants are a tool of empowerment and where citizens are
Honorable Ramahila, sorry for the interruption. There is a hand of the Honorable Mtetwa. Honorable Mtetwa, why do you want to be recognized?
Thank you, Chair. I observe that the member is wearing an ANC t-shirt. Is it allowed? Is it parliamentary allowed? Yes, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Honorable Mthethwa, the rules of procedure say that party logos is not to be displayed. And maybe by coincidence, maybe because the Honorable Ramahila realized that he's wearing a party regalia, from where I'm sitting, I'm only observing his collars. So for now, that's fine. But if he would stand up and we would see a logo, that would be in breach of the rules. Honorable Ramahila, please continue, but don't stand up.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry,
On a
through you,
point of
Chair.
order,
Through
Chair.
you, Chair.
On a point of
Through
order,
you, Chair. Honorable
Chairperson.
Honorable Ntlangwini, I will recognize you, but in future, please, if you want to be recognized, raise your hand.
Okay, I will do so, Chair. Chair, I will just request that the member maybe perhaps must switch off his video because it is visible. That we are seeing. You might not see it from your side, but we are seeing it, so he must switch off his video. Thank you. And never to be repeated because otherwise we'll take him to ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. I see the Honorable Ramahila has switched off. So, Honorable Ramahila, with that understanding, please continue.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was saying, as the African National Congress, we are one who were in charge of ensuring that we refer matters where consequence managers.
Honorable Ramahila, my apologies. I assume, Honorable Mthethwa, yours is an old hand. Honorable Kwankwa, I see your hand is raised.
With utmost respect, I was wondering whether I know that the UDM's term has passed, 10 rather has passed.
Yeah.
I had some bit of connectivity challenges. I met your message, Chairperson. If you can allow me to come in at the point appropriate
thank
for
you.
you, I would.
Let's just allow the Honorable Ramahila to continue, and then I'll afford you an opportunity.
Much obliged to you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Ramahila, my apologies for the interruptions, although it was partially caused by yourself. Is that now a new shift?
Thank you very much, Chair. The grants also play a critical role in stimulating the economy by increasing people's buying power. Furthermore, this demonstrates how social grants have a positive impact in reducing poverty, bridging socio-economic gap among different groups, particularly in supporting women and children who are disproportionately affected by poverty and inequality. Chair, it is important also for us to be able to say that it is important in the interest of justice, fairness, and accountability that we should allow space for factual investigation of the allegations to take place. We can't be eager to sensationalize matters and be preemptive, but should rather allow due processes to take place. And therefore, after that, consequence management will be applied wherever a finger is pointing at some individuals. Chair, we must therefore be resolved to address and uproot all areas of weakness, not only at SASSA, but government more broadly. President Cyril Ramaphosa rightfully categorized the impact of unresolved fraud and corruption, which must be collectively championed when he said, and I quote, "If corruption is not arrested or stopped, the greatest damage will not be in the funds that are stolen or the jobs that are lost. It will be in the damaging of our democracy. It will be in making our people have less confidence and have less trust in our democracy." Close quote. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kwankwa. You have your opportunity.
Chairperson, I'm much obliged to you. Thank you very much. The ongoing corruption and mismanagement at SASSA are a national challenge that can no longer be ignored. For example, the recovery of over 148 million in SRD grants paid to ineligible beneficiaries, as reported by the Auditor General, is just, in our view, a scratch on the surface into the scale of the systemic failure which lies deep within the agency itself. While adding to this, some employees have enriched themselves. Millions of South Africans are being denied the lifeline they desperately need. It is also quite alarming in our view that consequence management for the 5,812 public servants who fraudulently received SRD grants, as well as the 33,833 public servants who fraudulently obtained social grants, have not been put to task, have not been held to account in our view properly or sanctioned appropriately for that. One would argue that there are kingpins responsible for what is almost certainly an organized massive fraud in the SASSA system. Many of you will recall that in January this year, Minister Lindwe Zulu revealed that over the past 3 financial years, SASSA paid 140 million rands to dead beneficiaries belonging to 75,000 accounts. This cannot be allowed to continue. The current state represents a challenge and a betrayal of the trust that the public has on us as Parliament and an assault on the dignity of those in need. We have to, in our view, to do a number of things to address this challenge. One of the most glaring issues in our view is that with the SRD grant system and its reliance on digital platforms, we are depriving many people who are impoverished and who actually qualify for this because they have no access to technology needed to apply online. This system also excludes those who cannot afford smartphones or internet access, leaving the poorest of the poor out in the cold. This digital exclusion, in our view, must be addressed immediately. It also has been recently revealed that in Parliament that SASSA underspent on this SRD grant to the tune of billions of rands, to the exclusion of many people who require this kind of support and who require the support they require to be able to get out of poverty. It's not a matter of fiscal discipline. It's a matter of SASSA and this department resolving this issue for the benefit of the poorest of the poor. Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable De Villiers.
Thank you, House Chair. Social grants aims to assist those in our society who need it the most, and it is, and it will always be, DA policy that although we support a robust market economy that can grow the economy and create jobs, the state also has a responsibility to look after those who cannot look after themselves. The 27 million South Africans who qualify for SASSA grants are those in our society in desperate need of assistance. It should therefore not only outrage the DA, but every single political party and honest citizen of this country when SASSA corruption is exposed and we are faced with the very real situation that money meant to assist the most vulnerable in our society is ending up in the hands of the corrupt, who have no moral squabble with stealing from the poorest of the poor in our society. This week, it was exposed that in a random survey run by 2 Stellenbosch University students on 60 of their fellow university students on campus, 58 had active SASSA grant applications, yet 56 of those surveyed have never made a SASSA application. Further investigation by the DA has revealed it might just be the tip of the iceberg, as we have received 143 emails over just a few days confirming more cases where there are SRD grants registered against South African identities, but some unknown criminal is pocketing those grants. A recent Auditor General report on SASSA grant payments used computer-assisted audit techniques that made some further shocking discoveries. 15,987 social grant beneficiaries were identified as, wait for it, directors of companies who have been successfully awarded contracts by the state. These almost 16,000 individuals, who seem to be both SASSA grant beneficiaries and successful government tenderpreneurs at the same time, have collectively received over 231 million rand in just the last 23-24 financial year alone. How can it be that directors of successful tender businesses are also beneficiaries of SASSA social grants? The report further details 5,159 dead beneficiaries who have received SASSA grants equating to just under 15 million rand after they have actually died. Yet grant money is still flowing into these accounts and being collected. This is just the finding of the 23-24 audit, and the AG has recommended that a SAPS investigation should be opened to establish the exact amount overpaid over many years by SASSA to dead beneficiaries, and importantly, who has fraudulently benefited from it. Apart from tenderpreneurs living their best life on tender profits with SASSA grant cherries on top, and the dead receiving grants that fraudulently keep on giving, the AG report also found public service members, in other words, employees of the state, of the government, enjoying SASSA grant top-ups to their salaries. The AG found 11 Postbank employees who collectively enjoyed both their annual salaries and 133,800 Rand worth of SASSA grants, as well as 199 individuals who are either receiving a state salary, so they're on the state payroll, or a government employment pension fund pension, whilst also receiving a SASSA social support grant. But not to be outdone, there are 66 actual SASSA employees who, while being employed by SASSA, also receive SASSA social grants, collectively worth over 1.5 million rand. The implications of these findings are clear. We have state-employed and ex-state-employed officials defrauding SASSA and the government. But stealing from SASSA is not just stealing from the government. It is stealing from the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society. That is why, as chairperson of the Committee on Public Service and Administration, I will be writing to the Public Service Commission to ask for an urgent investigation into the findings of the AG that specifically relate to public service officials that are implicated in this corruption racket against the poor. Let there be no doubt, the DA is outraged that government employees are criminally siphoning off grant money meant for the poorest of the poor into the hands of those employed by the state. We will not rest until these individuals are investigated, charged, and put where they belong, behind bars. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Munyai.
To get my system organized. This things now. Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chairperson. I rise to welcome Minister Stolash's with regard to input with regard to the complementary alternative payment to accommodate those who are in deep rural areas with no access to technology, nor the broadband infrastructure. The African National Congress, led by His Excellency President Ramaphosa and Minister Tolashe, are committed to fight corruption and the state capture. The fact is that many in the state capture and corruption are facing the full might of the law through the instituted investigation. Honorable House Chair, the African National Congress reaffirmed its commitment to zero tolerance to fraud and corruption as a matter of the long-standing commitment to build ethical developmental state. The DSD, through SASSA, took practical steps to cancel the contract of the CPS which is now going under liquidation. Case has been opened to SAPS, and if this is not combating corruption, what is it? Even if they can resurface in the different form and content, be it N1, N2, or N3, they'll be dealt with decisively with law enforcement agency. Honorable House Chair, it is important, perhaps, for me to address this issue or the myth with regard to the so-called eligibility of the KHOI SAN students from Stellenbosch University with respect to the SRD grant. And I think many of the members who doesn't belong to portfolio committee, they don't recognize and know that Minister Tolashe is really moving forward to institute a practical investigation and assessment with regard to all these allegations. Allegation remains allegations until they are proven otherwise. Let me deal of these two students' eligibility with regard to SRD grant. Maybe before I could do that, let me dismiss the absurd and the barrage of propaganda. In fact, the myth of the two students' qualification for social grant and those who prematurely calls for the minister's resignation with no basis. One, I'm going to ask the people of South Africa, an honorable member, whether the father of Via KHOI, who was a channel partner for years with the Western Comstock Group, a global technology distributor and solution provider specializing in the distribution of cybersecurity, networking, data center, and cloud computing infrastructure. And also was involved in the channel with regards to Comstech, system integration, management service of information system and clouding solution, Sagents Analytics, Veritas, Adobe, VMware, Symantec, Microsoft, Cisco, Kaspersky, the list is long. The people of South Africa, tell me, make your judgment, who hacked or made an attempt to hack the security system of SASSA and the government of the Republic of South Africa. You become the judge. I think it is my own observation that these two poor students, I'm saying poor, not literally they are poor because they are coming from the rich family or the middle strata family. And you be the judge precisely because are they not a small screen for the background beyond the wall for the people who are middle strata and elite class, such as KHOI and also his wife, Ms. Hem, who wrote a degree in Masters of Medicine thesis and a rheumatologist? Can you say South Africans, they are qualifying for social grant or it's an attempt to state security? And the father of Sidras is the president of the Institute of Environment and Recreation Management. And he works for the Parks Department here in the DA-led government of the Western Cape. I'm not going to reveal currently the membership, political membership of these two parents. I will leave it to that. But I must say, Honorable House Chair, the development necessitate for urgent and comprehensive approach to combat the alleged fraud and corruption, which must include not only strict enforcement accountability measures, but also addressing the underlying socio-economic factors that perpetuate the corrupt practices. By tackling the root causes decisively, we can work towards restoring the public trust between the public institution of SASSA and the people. This will do, and we must do, through ensuring that the resources meant for the vulnerable are protected effectively. I must say, House Chair, without any delay, oh my system just go down. I don't know. Maybe it's hacked. I should presume. So we must say, Honorable House Chair, SASSA have to improve without any shadow of any doubt to improve their own system. Because we know that during the committee sitting yesterday, the Minister of Social Development, Minister Tolashe, also reflected on some of the alleged vulnerabilities experience at SASSA as a result of being the institution that processed large sums of money in the digitized form and the content. I don't know why my system is being destroyed like this.
This is exactly how the SASSA system is.
Honorable Mlangweni, no, please don't do that. Honorable Munyai, you are audible, so please continue.
AG also plays an important role by conducting an audit and also with their own culture shift strategy to make sure that there's an impact. The issue relating to review on the financial management and the operational efficiency of SASSA is of critical importance. Parliament, through our portfolio committee, we are committed to conduct the robust oversight without fear or favor with respect to the SASSA and also DSD. But we must understand the issues of the technology or the system around the world in the connected world. We understand that all the systems are vulnerable. So we need to work very hard and make sure that indeed we protect the system that are helping us to deliver services to the poor. Honorable Minister, we also support all your commitment in the program. And if we have listened very well to what the ministers would have said during a budget vote, that almost 45% is being spent to support the poor people who are affected by poverty, hunger, and inequality. So in this regard, we should not use this platform and this program for politicking, but however, to make a practical recommendation for the SASSA and the ministry. I must say, as a matter of record, the student that came before us as a portfolio committee, that did not present allegations that they raised in the media that were technical. They did not prove anything through technicality. They just made a general statement. And they could not do that because we wanted to know what areas of focus and threats that they claim has been breached and how it was done. And we understand what they raised as a high flag is the need for collaboration with their own government, which the minister doesn't have a problem to engage, but you don't look for employment through attempt on the government system, because that's bordering on the national security.
Thank you, Honorable Munyai. Unfortunately, your time is now run out.
It will be up, so it will be up.
Thank
you very much, Minister, for your presentation. It gives us a direction. Thank you.
Okay, the Honorable Abrams is now recognized to answer or to respond to this debate. Honorable Abrams, the Honorable de Villiers stopped 1 minute short of his allocated time, so you will have 3 minutes at your disposal.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Minister, the topic of debate was not to give an overview of SASSA, but to tell the grandparents, parents, and youth of this country who are locked out of the social grant they so desperately need, that they don't have to go to bed hungry or write their examinations on an empty stomach, what you are going to do about the ongoing fraud and corruption at SASSA, which you did not do today because the spin wheel is still spinning. The debate today confirms, as MPs, we witness the failures of SASSA on a daily basis in our constituencies. Let us be reminded that we are elected to be the voice of the voiceless and to protect those who cannot protect themselves, not to shield the executive from accountability, as we continue to see by some MPs in this debate today and in yesterday's portfolio committee meeting. It is unthinkable that Honorable Munyai would attack the families of 2 students blowing the whistle on fraud and corruption. This is the hostile environment in which whistleblowers face. And we once again thank those 2 students and their families for being brave and coming forward with these allegations. As the DA, we say thank you to all non-governmental stakeholders, active citizens who assist us in holding DSD and SASSA to account. It is because of you that SASSA cannot gaslight an entire nation. Fraud and corruption are not victimless crimes. It is about human beings, the 28 million vulnerable South Africans whose dignity depend on a social grant. Stealing from the most vulnerable is the lowest form of criminality, to take food off the table of the destitute. These criminals belong behind bars, House Chairperson, and the Democratic Alliance. We will do whatever we can to assist in this regard. It is why we continue to urge those affected by issues with the SRD grant to continue to share their experiences by emailing us on fightcorruption@da.org.za. Because to the Democratic Alliance, your stories are not myths as it is to the ANC members on this platform. House Chairperson, let us in this new political dispensation be one of hope and accountability. Let us together restore the dignity of our people, and let it start at the very heart of the social contract for vulnerable citizens with SASSA. Thank you, House Chairperson, and thank you to the honourable members for their contribution in this matter of national importance.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, that concludes this debate and the business of this virtual mini-plenary session. This mini-plenary session will now rise.